Senator Raybould, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I think we discussed this subject fully before we took our recess. I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Raybould. See no one else in the queue. Senator Clements, you're recognized to close on your motion.
Thank you, Madam President. This is AM 1745 is the committee amendment. 5 items on there, unanimous from the committee. That was just cleaning up, removing some expenditures that were going through game and parks. So we're running out of money there, so we're striking that. We're revising, adding some more language for special education funds, authority and the Education Future Fund, and clarifying the funding for food distribution organization, making sure that we're requiring them to be 501c3 nonprofits. I ask for your green vote on AM 1745. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Clements. The question before the body is the adoption of AM 1745 to LB 818. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
19 ayes, 6 nays, place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized persons, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, Day, Conrad, Frederickson, McKinney, Lippincott, Walls, Bostar, Ibaugh, Lowe, Duncan, Hunt, and John Cavanaugh, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. Senator Ben Hansen, we're lacking Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, Senator Conrad, Senator Frederickson, Senator Wall, Senator Ibaugh, and Senator Hunt. Would you like to proceed? Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Clements, would you accept call-in votes?
Yes.
Senator Bostar voting yes. Senator Ballard voting yes. Senator Armendariz voting yes. Senator Dover voting yes. Senator Lowe voting yes.
Record, Mr. Clerk.
27 ayes, 0 nays on the adoption of the amendment, Madam President.
The amendment is adopted. I raise the call. Next item.
Mr. President, or Madam President, Senator Bostelman would move to amend with AM 1623.
Senator Bosselman, you're recognized to open on AM 1623.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, colleagues. AM 1623 amends the language for the County Bridge Match Program to ensure there are funds available for our counties to help maintain their bridges over the next few years. The County Bridge Match Program is a match grant program that provides 55% of matching funds to repair or replace deficient county bridges to a maximum of $250,000 per bridge. The amendment strikes on lines 6 and 7 the words "except that no more than 40." Strikes those words, and it adds on line 6 the word 40. Last fall, Director Selmer testified in front of the Transportation Telecommunications Committee about the importance of this program. To date, around $25 million has been spent using the County Bridge Match Program. In 2023, the selected proposals included 30 bridges and in 18 counties utilizing $5 million from the County Bridge Match Program. The former director further indicated that the fund was set to expire in June of this year. Upon learning of the sunset date, Senator Mosier introduced LB 124, which is included in LB 683 that is on final reading, to extend the sunset date to 2029 in order to continue the program. The Transportation Infrastructure Bank Fund, which funds the County Bridge Match Program, has been a self-sustaining fund generating revenue through Nebraska fuel tax and interest. In FY 21-22, the fund had a beginning balance of $48 million, generated $29.3 million through the gas tax and interest, expended $22 million, and had an ending balance of $54 million. The fund's most recent balance was at $47 million as of March 21, 2023. What my amendment does, in conjunction with Senator Mosier's bill, is to fulfill the intent of the legislature who originally created this program to utilize the full $40 million originally intended for the County Bridge Match Program. Each year, we receive a report from the Department of Transportation on the progress of the County Bridge Match Program. This fund is crucial to our counties to assist them in repairing and replacing aged infrastructure, and I ask for your green vote on AM 1623 and LB 818 and advance this to final reading. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Bosselman. Senator Clements, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. This is a friendly amendment, and I believe it's going to help many counties. The number one item is this is not coming out of the cash reserve fund. It's not coming out of general funds. This is coming out of a cash fund from Department of Transportation, from, I believe, from fuel tax. And so it doesn't change any of the numbers that we have in the general fund or cash reserve. And also it does make sure that the counties are able to receive more money for roads and bridge construction, which my county commissioners have mentioned that they really appreciate the County Bridge Match Program. As construction is becoming more and more expensive, I'm glad to see that we're able to make sure we allocate more toward the counties. So I support AM 1623 and ask for your green vote on it. Thank you, Senator Bosselman, for bringing this.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator Brandt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I am in full support of AM 1623 and LB 818. I commend Senator Bosselman for taking the initiative and finding the money to fund this program. Senator Moser and myself had identical bills to do this, and Senator Moser's passed to extend the date for the county bridge match program. This is critically important to all 93 counties in the state of Nebraska. When you get into southeast Nebraska, where my district is at, my 4 counties each have more than 200 bridges in Fillmore, Thayer, Jefferson, and Saline County, as opposed to western Nebraska, where some of those counties have less than 10. This program allows a county to get up to 55% reimbursement for box culverts and bridges. And if we don't have this assistance from the state, what happens is when we have severe storms, we close those roads. And when those roads are closed, then the constituents have to drive around until the money is found or the property taxes are raised to repair these roads. So thank you, Senator Bosselman, for taking the initiative and finding this money and not getting it from the general fund.
Thank you, Senator Brandt. Senator Dorn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I too get up in full support of this amendment, AM 1623 and the LB 818. Many of you know I was on the county board, and when we were on there, our county and other counties went together and put packages together for in the area, different bridges and different bridge box culverts and stuff, and even regular culverts. And this has been a tremendous program for the counties that to be able to get this extra financial help. Many of them, their budgets are tight and they don't have always that extra money to put towards bridges. So very, very good program. I'm glad to see or hear that Senator Bosselman has put the work in this to make sure that this program now will have those full 40 million expended over the next so many years, and then it's not going to sunset and not help the county. So very much in support of it. Thank you. Yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Dorn. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to do something wacky and wild and say, I stand in support of AM 1623. I think this is a great thing for us to do. The bridge program is really essential to infrastructure, and making sure that those funds are being utilized is something that I think Senator John Kavanaugh mentioned, that Senator Julie Slama sometimes, I don't know why I'm saying first names, I guess habit, sorry. Senator Slama has wholeheartedly opposed something, and I would like to say that I wholeheartedly support AM 1623. Thank you, Senator Bosselman, for bringing it.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Bosselman, you're recognized to close on your amendment. Senator Bosselman waives closing. The question before the body is the adoption of AM 1623 to LB 18. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have all voted who care to? Record, Mr. Clerk.
42 ayes, no nays on adoption of the amendment.
The amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for the next item.
I have nothing further on the bill, Senator.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're.
Senator Ballard for a motion first, if you could.
Senator Ballard for a motion.
Madam President, I move that LB 818 be advanced to ENR for engrossing.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I was holding on to amendments. Is it too late to add amendments? I'm looking for a head nod in one direction or another. It's not? No? Okay. If anybody else could get in the queue to give me a moment to get my amendments filed, I would really appreciate it. And I will talk until people are in the queue. People are in the queue. Look at that magical. Thank you so much. I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Senator Conrad, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, colleagues. Hopefully everybody was refreshed after a lovely dinner break and an opportunity to catch their breath off the floor and find some sustenance. Just as a point of reference to where we are, again, not always perfectly consistent in terms of approach, but I think our body does a pretty good job of yielding time when a colleague needs time, punching in if a colleague needs a little bit of time to attend to business on the floor, extending debate if a colleague is waiting for an amendment to come down from bill drafters or what have you. Sometimes we do that more candidly. Sometimes we're a little bit more subtle about what we're doing in regards to our debate. So try and always vote in the affirmative when we have an opportunity for a call of the House in the spirit of collegiality and as part of our tradition here. I personally almost always vote against cutting off debate, whether through calling the question, because I think more debate rather than less debate is beneficial to our institutions. So in the spirit of collegiality, I punched in to help Senator Kavanaugh get her amendments filed. And additionally, want to thank Senator Bosselman for his leadership and good work in regards to the infrastructure and the bridge measure that he just brought forward. I know that's something that's very important to each of our districts. And I really appreciate not only the substance of the measure that he brought forward, but really appreciate his leadership too, and coming around the floor, giving everybody a heads up, talking through the issues. That was really cool and really appreciated. So kudos to Senator Bosselman, and glad that we'll get some more resources for our critical infrastructure needs. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Madam President, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh would move to amend LB 818 with AM 1727.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to open on AM 1727.
Thank you, Madam President. AM 1727 strikes Section 2. I apologize, colleagues. My staff has been amazing at being prepared on my behalf, and I had today's amendment. I have a sticky note that says today's bills on it, and I thought, I'm not going to file 818 unnecessarily, so I'm going to hold on to those. And then I saw Senator Ben Hansen has an amendment. I didn't realize it was to final. You do. You have an amendment pending on this bill. And so I was like, oh, that'll be fine. I don't need to file an amendment. And then all of a sudden, so mayhem. So this amendment strikes Section 2. And let's see here. I believe that our cloture vote is at 7:02-ish. Is it 7:02? No, it's not. 7:13. Okay, I was off by 11 minutes. Great. Well, then I might have to file. Oh, no. God. So less than an hour. But I probably don't have enough time on this amendment, so I may have to file another amendment to get us to that time. But I'm also trying to work on something with Senator Breezy on the next bill. So it's kind of like a madcap situation here where I need to talk to people about taxes. People want to talk to me over there about taxes, about the next bill. And then I'm standing here talking about striking Section 2. So I'm just going to pull up the bill and review what striking Section 2 does. Also, I hope everyone had a lovely dinner break. I ate my typical bag salad. So was it lovely? Yeah. Was it sustenance? I guess. I did eat Muchachos mac and cheese for lunch today because somebody got me Muchachos mac and cheese, and who am I? I'm not a heathen. Obviously, I'm going to eat that. So I had that, and then I was like, oh, the mac and cheese was delicious. It's just that, as I previously stated, my gallbladder and I are having a very, very difficult relationship with one another. And my gallbladder is just sort of like a nagging partner telling me constantly to eat more healthy. So hence the constant bag salad. But I did have muchachos mac and cheese this afternoon for lunch. How many times can I say muchachos? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. I hope somebody is counting. Muchachos. I am legitimately, I'm looking for the ENR amendment to see what striking section 2 is. Okay, here we are. So strike section 2. So I'm assuming that this is striking section 2 from ENR 32 on LB 818. If you are following along and you want to look at what it is, I think that's what it is, page 1, line 9, section 2. So this would strike, the state treasurer shall transfer an amount as directed by the budget administrator of the budget division of the Department of Administrative Services pursuant to subsections 2 and 3 of section 82-331, not to exceed 1 million from the general funds to the Nebraska Cultural Preservation Endowment Fund, December 31, 2024, or as soon thereafter as administratively possible. So let's not strike section 2. Let's just, have a conversation until 7:13 or thereabout, and then not strike section 2. So, all right. I have another amendment that I'll have to get filed just in case, since clearly I wasn't Mac on the spot this evening. I'm going to strike section 1 in the next amendment. So I'll get that signed and in triplicate. Have to sign everything in triplicate. And my signature this session has become extraordinarily illegible. So I actually signed a card back in the clerk's office. There's a card back there in the clerk's office for people to sign. And I signed it and I did the signature, and the clerk's staff is all going to be like, oh, we know that signature. I used the signature that I've been using on my amendments. So it is totally illegible. And I realized that after I did it in pen, and I was like, well, that's not much of a thank you card signature now, is it? But I guess it's true to my form. So now I am signing my next amendment, which will strike section 1. And part of the reason that my signature has become illegible is that my name is long. It has a lot of A's in it, and it's long. And if you write it as many times as I write it in a day, you're gonna get, I guess, a little lackadaisical. So that's where I'm at on it. How much time do I have, Madam President?
3.5 minutes.
Madam President, you seem very enthused by my signature conversation, so I'm going to continue my signature conversation. It may become my signature of a conversation. So my signature is very long and mostly illegible, and it's basically M scribble, C scribble. What is the second M for? My middle name. My middle name is Munnelly. And if you go downstairs, take a little walk, look at the gallery of former legislators, you will see John Munnelly, or Red, as he was called, my great uncle, my grandmother's brother. And I am named after his daughter. Her name is Michaela Munnelly. Well, she's married and she has been for a long time, but I'm not going to say her married last name because I don't want people to harass her. Interestingly, though, My neighbor directly across the street from me, her name is also Michaela, spelled the same way as I spell it. And that is very unusual. Well, not how I spell it, how my parents spell it. Very, very unusual. And I asked her, I was like, are you named after someone? Because this is not like a common spelling. She is also named after my dad's cousin. Imagine that. And we live across the street from each other. And we lived across the street from each other for a couple of years before we knew this. And her kids went to grade school with my niece and nephew. So like we had lots of connections anyways. And then turns out she's named after the same person I'm named after. Who would have thunk it? Once when I was working in Washington, D.C., a woman called my boss's office and wanted to leave a message. Her name was Michaela. I asked her to spell it because there's lots of different ways to spell it. She spelled her name the same way I spell my name. She was calling from San Francisco. I said, this is a really unusual way to spell your name. Are you named after someone? Yes, my mom is a school teacher in Omaha, Nebraska. Guess who one of her students was? My dad's cousin. Yep.
1 minute.
We're everywhere. Michaela's with an A. Or Machala. If you have me in your phone and you have Siri and Siri will announce my name, Machala Kavanaugh. Machala. Machala Kavanaugh. So, and I also spell, when I shorthand my name for Mac, which I do sometimes, I spell the H, I use the H. I don't know why. So it's like more like Mach, but I say Mac, M-A-C-H, Mac. That's how I spell Mac. I guess to distinguish that I'm a Mac versus a different Mac. I'm not really sure. Like Johnny Mac, John McAllister. I think I'm about out of time. It's been great talking about my name and my signature. I'll be back on the mic in a little bit because there's other people in the queue. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Senator Erdman, you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Day, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator Erdman, for that eloquent and important discussion on the mic. I wanted to make sure we're continuing to remind everyone that there are several of us in the room that are opposing some of, or being present, not voting on some of these budget bills because we fundamentally oppose the building of a new prison. I'm not sure if any of you saw Senator McKinney had passed out the CJI's report on Nebraska's criminal justice system, I think a couple of weeks ago. And I'm just now getting to the point where I am going through it. And I was going to read a little bit of it on the mic. The challenge, it says, is Nebraska's correction system is in crisis. Over the last decade, Nebraska increased its prison population by 21%, outpacing state population growth nearly threefold. Nebraska was one of just 4 states across the country that saw its incarceration rate increase in 2020, bucking national trends focused on lowering incarceration and crime at the same time. Unsurprisingly, Nebraska's prisons are bursting at the seams. Nearly every state prison is operating above capacity, with 6 of the 10 prisons at over 120% of operational capacity as of early 2021. According to 2020 data, Nebraska has the most acute prison overcrowding in the country. The swelling of Nebraska's prisons has commandeered a sizable portion of the state's budget, with corrections expenditures increasing over 51% since 2011. In 2020, corrections expenditures were over $250 million at $272.3 million, not including an estimated $270 million for a new prison to meet the needs of a growing prison population. Yet this increasing financial burden for Nebraska taxpayers has not enhanced public safety. Over the last decade, recidivism rates have not declined, with nearly 1/3 of individuals released from prison returning within 3 years. Given these conditions, the correction system is unable to do what taxpayers expect: divert people from criminal behavior after release. Absent policy changes, Nebraska's prison population is projected to increase roughly 25% by 2030. This growth would likely require building a second new prison in addition to the $250 million facility proposed by former Governor Pete Ricketts to accommodate the current population. The solution. In spring 2022, the Nebraska Legislature debated a bill containing data-driven justice reform policies to reduce the state's projected prison growth while promoting public safety and reducing recidivism. The bill, LB 920, was the product of a year-long effort by a bipartisan group of stakeholders from across the state, the Nebraska Criminal Justice Reinvestment Working Group. Based on years of criminological research, LB 920's policies were crafted to maximize taxpayer resources by reserving prison beds for serious offenses, expanding alternatives to incarceration, and improving community-based behavioral health services to interrupt misconduct and prevent crime. Had LB 920 passed, it would have decreased projected prison population growth by over 1,000 people. Thank you, Madam President. It would have decrease projected prison population growth by over 1,000 people by 2030, saving the state more than $55 million in additional costs. Nebraska leaders have a critical opportunity to bring the bipartisan working group's important efforts to the next level and address the crisis in its correction system by implementing 7 policy priorities. 1, preserve prison beds for the most serious misconduct. 2, tailor penalties with severity of conduct. 3, streamline release for people prepared to re-enter society. 4, expand alternatives to incarceration. 5, enhance re-entry supports for justice-involved people. 6, invest in community-based behavioral health services. And 7, support community supervision best practices. I think I'm about out of time. I will get back in the queue. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Day. Senator Conrad, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, colleagues. I specifically wanted to talk about specific interest I have in state policy in regards to oversight and appropriations regarding state settlement funds that is contained in the overall budget train. But then I also, since we're taking a little bit of time this evening so that some negotiations on the next bill can continue with senators who were engaged in the debate, I also wanted to take a step back because I think that we've had a pretty robust debate about some of the big ticket items in the budget that cause the great deal, that perhaps cause the great, I'm tired, that perhaps causes the great amount of disagreement or concern, but we haven't really had as much time perhaps to talk about some of the other hidden jewels or treasures within the overall budget that I know the committee worked really, really hard to put together. And like any piece of legislation, it's typically not all bad or all good, but an amalgamation of an attempt to reach consensus and compromise. So when you page through your budgetary book, you can see, and I agree with Senator Linehan, the transparency in terms of how they presented the underlying bills that have been incorporated into the budget is very welcome and very clear and excellent to understand. And I don't remember seeing a chart like that in the past, so I'm really grateful for that development in terms of how we present our budget. But I also just wanted to note that, again, investment in the Education Future Fund, while I think subject to concerns in other regards, is a good thing, is part of the momentous shift in terms of education funding that we took up earlier this week under Governor Pillen's proposal and championed by Senator Sanders. I think there is a lot of really important investment in the budget when it comes to meeting our negotiated rates for not only our first responders on the state payroll, but all public employees. That was truly, truly long overdue, and want to give a shout out to the union leadership for their excellent negotiation, and give a shout out to management for coming to the table in good faith to come to an agreement and consensus about compensation for our hardworking state employees across so many spheres of government. That's going to make a big difference to a lot of families, and it's in recognition of their commitment to public service as well. So I think that's something we can and all be really, really proud of. I'm also really happy to see funding in the overall budgetary approach for continuation of an educational benefit for public employees, for their children to attend community colleges. I think that is an excellent enhancement to our overall workforce policies, and I think will pay great dividends for building our workforce now and into the future. I know Senator McDonnell and others worked hard to put together funding for shovel-ready projects, for a very patriotic and well-deserved war memorial, which I know, I believe probably all of us support, and that's contained in the budget.
1 minute.
There's, thank you, Madam President, at least 2 major components in regards to beautification of our unique and awe-inspiring state capitol, in putting some funding together to create a visitor center that Senator Pankatin, former Senator Pankatin, a good friend of mine, is championing with other state leaders, working with former legislators to ensure that we have structures in place to maintain the beautiful courtyards that were recently renovated to meet the original vision of the Capitol architects. There's a significant amount of money in the budget in relation to addressing housing justice issues, which I know Senator Vargas and Senator Breezy have championed, which are very welcome and exciting. There's funds in here that Senator Jacobson has championed to improve opportunities for outdoor youth education, which is very exciting. The crime lab expansion,
Time,
tax
Senator.
relief, and mentorship. So I just wanted to also add a point for those really good things in the budget.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I hope that everybody had a nice break over the dinner break. I regret how little time we really have this session, not only to socialize, but to strategize, frankly, and get together and meet and talk about different things. I know that originally with this session, Senator Arch's goal was to have very few late nights if possible, to not discuss controversial topics, which we wouldn't have to be doing if he had just been not voting on general file for 574. And we're really having as many late nights as possible now because of that choice. And there are some really kind folks in Nebraska who have been watching what we're doing, who are happy that we're standing up for the rights of their kids or their friends' kids, and trying not to roll back the clock in Nebraska on human rights and civil rights and get us going down a path that we've seen so many states go down. In Montana right now, they're facing legal action against some legislation that they passed, blocking health care for trans individuals. In Missouri, we're seeing the same thing. And as a courtesy, to say nothing about human rights, but it's going to waste a lot of time and money for taxpayers if Nebraska goes down the same path. But we have already wasted so much time and money just because of this vote on general file on 574. Some of the people watching heard what I was saying a couple nights ago about when Many of us are in elementary school, and these memories of having Kool-Aid or different types of drinks. And Kool-Aid, of course, was invented in Nebraska, which is a big point of pride for us. And their parent company now, Heinz, is also one of the companies that signed the letter opposing LB 574. So, that's another company that originated in Nebraska that is against this anti-trans, anti-gay hate that people like Senator Linehan and Senator Kauth and Senator Slama have really put their whole hearts behind. When you're in the mood for Kool-Aid, you can walk into a grocery store and you can choose from about 20 different flavors, all priced at about $0.25. There used to be so many more different flavors. And if you're in the market for some quintessentially classic Kool-Aid flavors, you have to enter the fruit-flavored underbelly of one of the most intriguing subsets in the world of pop culture food enthusiasts, and that is the black market of vintage Kool-Aid packet collectors. There's no real quantifiable way to know just how big this particular community is, but the best place to check the pulse on this market and on the vitality of this market is on eBay. A quick search for Kool-Aid packet on eBay seems to signal that the market is alive and well, returning over 250 active listings, some of which are going for triple-digit asking prices. $400 for a still sealed packet of pink Swimingo. $225 for a single packet of Yabba Dabba Dewberry. $195 for a single packet of one of Kool-Aid's most beloved flavor mascots and a favorite of one of the most high-powered lobbyists out in the rotunda who texted me, Purplesaurus Rex. A search for recently completed eBay auctions showed a display of 1960s grape Kool-Aid packets being sold for $250 and a single packet of Rockadile Red closing out at $125. The good stuff doesn't come cheap. If you're scratching your head as to why people might pay hundreds of dollars for packages of unsweetened drink powder that only cost $0.25 in the grocery store, continue on, keep listening, because the vintage Kool-Aid packet collector community is really just a microcosm of broader dynamics of fan culture, of economics, and of the kind of vitality that keeps our neighborhood grocery stores up and running. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Day, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Returning to the handout that Senator McKinney had passed out onto all of our desks, which is the, CJI report on Nebraska's correction system, or as he so eloquently called it last night, Nebraska's punitive system, I believe is what he called it. Nebraska's, I don't know. He said something about punitive and replaced the word corrections with punitive, and it was, I thought, brilliant. So policy priorities. 1, preserve prison beds for the most serious misconduct. Research shows that imprisonment harms individuals' health, economic stability, and positive relationships, all of which may contribute to increased criminal involvement following release. Moreover, there is no conclusive evidence suggesting that longer prison stays are more effective at reducing recidivism or protecting public safety than shorter stays, and in certain contexts, longer stays have been shown to increase the likelihood of recidivism. It's almost like being in prison isn't great for people when it comes to rehabilitating them and helping them get out of a cycle of crime. Imagine. Despite these findings, the average length of stay on a prison sentence in Nebraska grew by 38% from 2011 to 2020, driven in part by longer sentences resulting from consecutive sentences, mandatory minimums, and habitual criminal enhancements. Sentence enhancements cost taxpayers significantly, yet provide minimal public safety benefit. As predicted by the research, funneling more taxpayer funds to cover longer stays has not improved justice system outcomes, as recidivism rates have remained high. Despite this, Nebraska continues to use longer sentences for less serious nonviolent criminal behaviors. Policy recommendations would be to reserve mandatory minimum sentences for violent and serious offenses, ensure habitual criminal enhancement statute is only used for violent or sex offenses, modify credit accrual for those with mandatory minimum sentences to incentivize behavior change, and reduce the use of discretionary consecutive sentences. The potential impact would be that long sentences are a primary driver of Nebraska's prison population, and limiting sentencing enhancements could significantly reduce the length of time people spend in prison and therefore the overall prison population. Nebraska can save more than 300 prison beds by 2030 by implementing all 4 policy recommendations described above. The second policy recommendation would be to tailor penalties with severity of conduct. Criminological research has consistently found that incarceration is not more effective at reducing recidivism than non-custodial sanctions such as probation. In fact, incarceration may lead to higher rates of recidivism for certain types of lower level behavior like drug offenses and technical violations, and is significantly more expensive to taxpayers than alternatives to incarceration. The total cost to house a person in state prison is over $40,000 per year. Given that, it is critical that Nebraska policymakers ensure that the length of a prison sentence corresponds to the severity of the conduct. Drug possession was the leading offense for admission to Nebraska prisons in 2020. Unlike many other states, Nebraska categorizes possession of controlled substances other than marijuana as a felony, regardless of the amount possessed.
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. This means that people who are addicted to drugs and in possession for personal use, not sale, are punished with felony sentences. Research suggests that deterrence does not work for many drug users because of the seriousness of their behavioral health disorders. A more effective response to drug possession may be alternatives to incarceration, such as treatment. Imagine treatment for drug addiction as opposed to putting them in jail. Imagine. Unlike many states, Nebraska considers a third or subsequent shoplifting offense to be a felony, even with the value of the item is below the typical threshold for felony theft at $1,500. This means that people can be convicted of a felony and go to prison for stealing something under $5 if it is a third theft offense. In 2020, property offenses represented more than 10% of admissions to the Nebraska Department of Correctional
Time,
Services.
Senator.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Day. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate everyone giving me some space to talk to folks about the next bill. And I think we've reached an impasse. So I'll just be back. Is this my first time, Madam President? Do I have one more in a close? Okay,
Yes.
I'll just hop on back into the queue. I wonder what the history of the word queue is, and how do people spell it? Queue. The queue. It's kind of a British term, like queue up. Get in the queue. Cheerio, pip, pip. Also, I don't know what cheerio, pip. Cheerio, pip, pip. There's this program on NPR called Way with Words. Love that. That would be a good question for them. If anyone is watching this must-see TV, reality TV that is your Nebraska Legislature, and you want to submit a question to Way with Words on my behalf, history of the word queue or the origins. I'm looking for it now. Origin of the word queue. Let's see here. All right. This is just using the internets, the Googles. I Googled it. Google is a company that signed on to a letter that was sent to the legislature and the governor saying that they don't like our discrimination policy potential. Okay, origin, Latin, French. It has both Latin and French on here, don't know why. So late 16th century as the heraldic term denoting the tail of an animal. From French, based on Latin quada, C-A-U-D-A, cauda. Thank you, Senator Day. Latin cauda, meaning tail. Compare with Q-C-U-E and Q-Q-U-E-U-E, sense one of the noun. Dates from the late 18th century. It's not really much of an, what's the difference between Q-C-U-E and Q-Q-U-E-U-E? For the more commonly encountered meanings, try to remember to use Q-C-U-E when referring to hints. Can I, like a cue card? Cue the music. C-U-E. So hints, suggestions, and information. Just an FYI, this little right up here uses the serial Oxford comma. And to use Q-Q-U-E-U-E when referring to things that organize into lines. So we are organized into a line, queuing up, as it were. How do you use the word queue? I don't know. How do you use the word queue? To wait in the line of people, often to buy something. Dozens of people were queuing up to get tickets. We had to queue for 3 hours to get in. I studied abroad in the UK, and the term queue was used a lot for I was in college. So going out, people would say, well, how long is the queue?
1 minute.
The line to get in to wherever. Also, at least the town that I was in, really into theme parties where you have to wear, they call it fancy dress, which I did not know when they said it's a fancy dress party that meant it was a theme. I thought it was like get dressed up nice kind of party. It wasn't. It was a theme, fancy dress theme party. The one I'm specifically thinking of, I think, was like a 1920s theme, fancy dress. How was the queue? Is it a long line? Mostly the girls would want to know if it was a long queue because they were debating whether to bring a coat or not. Like, do I have to stand outside without a coat on for a long time? Then maybe I'll bring a coat. So, Q, Q-U-E-U-E. I want to just drop that first E for some reason. Q-U-E-U-E. Q.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President, and good evening, colleagues. Good evening, Nebraska. As part of the overall budgetary approach, I did want to draw the body's attention to page 47 in our budget books, and it highlights a section in terms of how we're utilizing some of the opioid settlement funds. So how the legislature interfaces with Attorney General settlements has long been of interest to me, including in my prior term of service. Of course, we, I think, are all well versed in how Nebraska was very thoughtful in their approach in the utilization of something very specific, very well known, very tangible, like the nationwide tobacco settlement that happened many, many years ago, and how that helped to really seed our healthcare cash fund, and how that prudent approach has, I think, stretched those dollars further and helped to retain some fidelity to the reason that the settlement was agreed upon, and help to complement and address Nebraska's approach to meeting unmet healthcare needs for our citizenry. So I'm just lifting that up as kind of an example about what I'm talking about here. We have seen a host of settlements come to Nebraska over the years, typically under the Attorney General's consumer protection work. Not always, but typically those are the most well-known kind of settlements and litigation that we enter into. And you might remember in the wake of the Great Recession, spurred by the housing crisis and the housing bubble, the Attorney General in Nebraska and all across the country entered into a settlement with some of the larger banks to address the harm and the economic injustice that really was wrought on so many homeowners, and then also states and localities, et cetera. So when some of those funds were coming in, and I was a member of the Appropriations Committee, we worked very hard to, under what lawyers call basically a CYPRES theory, C-Y-P-R-E-S, we made a play to get some of those housing settlement dollars, instead of just dumping them directly into a settlement cash fund at the AG's office, or otherwise get dumped into general funds, or be committed to ongoing operations for the state or the Attorney General. We made a play to grab some of those dollars and push them through the Commission on Public Advocacy and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and trying to make the case that those settlement funds, which the Attorney General is suing in our citizenry's name for harm that has befallen our citizenry, those dollars, my belief is they should be directed as closely as possible, tailored as closely as possible to the best and highest purpose in state government that relates to the underlying litigation. That's my perspective on it. And I think that we should definitely have more oversight on cash settlement funds. And I think that we should have some more measures in place to ensure a more consistent approach. I actually have a bill pending before the executive board on that very topic, and the Attorney General's office, I believe, if memory serves, actually came in neutral in that regard. Thank you, Madam President. I'll have a chance to pass around later. There was a very informative article in Governing Magazine just over the last week or so that talked about some of the experiences our sister states are facing in dealing with the opioid settlement funds. And it seems that each state has learned some lessons, including from the tobacco settlement, but there's still nuances in terms of how each state is utilizing these funds. And if you look on our budget book, on page 47, you can see the state of Nebraska is expecting to receive over $100 million in settlements from the drug distribution companies and producers of opioids. So we start to see just a little bit of funds being appropriated to address opioid-related impacts, particularly
Time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in opposition to AM 1727 and also in opposition to LB 818, as we've appropriated funds this year for a new prison, which I'm completely against out the gate, 100%. And I'm waiting to hear back from a friend of mine about the drinks that are available in prison and if that varies in Nebraska between different prisons. This friend of mine served time in a couple different facilities and also worked in the kitchen. And so I was trying to find out if Kool-Aid was anything that they had there, or if they had Tang or something like that, or nothing. Maybe they didn't. I have one friend who I will not say who it is, because it will get back to them, who is a collector of vintage everything, anything and everything. Everything in the house is vintage. Most of it is beautiful and like in really good condition, but there's a lot of stuff on the shelves for display, just kind of art objects, I guess, that are vintage, but are very, very, very dusty, like very faded, dusty type of stuff. And, you know, I'm a vintage collector too. I've got some great chairs, some good Danish chairs from like the 1950s that are just fabulous that I've had. They were one of my first adult purchases in my late 20s, and I love these chairs. But like a dusty box of food, I don't understand collecting that, but there is a whole market for collectors of this kind of thing. And if you can get past the idea that collecting expired food is what you're doing, Kool-Aid is actually a really ideal thing to collect. And that's according to Matt from Dinosaur Dracula, which is one of the most visited and longest running nostalgia sites on the internet. And he declined to give his last name. But Matt from Dinosaur Dracula has been writing about old food, movies, toys, and other pop cultural ephemera since 2000, which is really old in terms of when blogs were starting and everything. If you've been blogging for 23 years, you were there in the beginning. And he routinely touts Kool-Aid as one of his favorite subjects to write about and one of the best entry places for somebody who's just getting into collecting vintage, because sometimes at a garage sale or an estate sale is kind of a stretch, but you can sometimes find really good deals on old packets of Kool-Aid, and then these things can fetch, as I said before, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars on eBay. There are serious collectors. While he's primarily a Kool-Aid collector, Matt occasionally rips into a vintage packet with the earnest devotion of a skilled sommelier to conduct taste tests for his readers. He writes of a 1987 packet of Surf and Berry Punch. Everyone like my age, millennial people, mid 30s to late 40s, Google Surf and Berry Punch, look at what that packet looks like, and you will be like snapped into your childhood. Like it's one of those things that scratches a memory that you never thought you would ever think about again. Just looking at what this packet looks like was like, wow, I feel like I'm 6 years old. And some people think I'm acting like I'm 6 years old. He writes of a 1987 packet of Surf and Berry Punch. I wasn't wild about the powder color, which to me felt too dim and purpley for a beverage that was supposed to look like liquid fire trucks. Fortunately, it changed color as soon as it hit water, like a less braggy grape bludini. This was basically second grade sangria.
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. His description of a 1989 packet of Mountain Berry Punch, that's another great design. We've talked about the design of HV7, which is the cup. It's the product name of the cup that comes out of the vending machine for the coffee machine downstairs, and how it's based on the jazz design from Sweetheart Cup Company that came out in 1992. And I would be interested to know who the designers are for the original Kool-Aid packets in the 80s that were so, formative to people in my generation. When you see that imagery, it just brings you right back immediately. Mountain Berry Punch, sweet Pink Flamingo, Surf and Berry Punch, a lot of different kinds of punch, Purple Saurus Rex. But these design jobs are...
Time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Conrad, you're recognized. This is your final opportunity.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam President. Sadly, I don't have a lot to add to the Kool-Aid debate. My folks were too strict, and we never really had Kool-Aid growing up in the house, but it was a big treat when we visited friends and they had those delicious, tasty treats, which of course have deep Nebraska roots with Kool-Aid. But I wanted to just return to a little bit more commentary in this last time in regards to our oversight, engagement, and appropriations role when it comes to state settlement funds. I think former Attorney General Peterson was pretty aggressive and pretty adept at securing significant settlements for the state of Nebraska on a wide range of issues, and for that he should be commended. But we do need to make sure that when the Attorney General is suing in the name of our citizenry for harm that occurred to our citizenry, that we are stepping in and utilizing our inherent power of the purse, our appropriations powers, to make sure those funds are directed to address the harm for the citizens that we settled those cases on behalf of. So as I mentioned, I was going to pass it out to everybody, but it's like a 15-page long article, and I think that would be too many trees to kill. But if you look at Governing Magazine from April 23rd, 2023, you can see a really excellent article about various state plans and how they vary for spending the $26 billion in opioid settlement funds, which I think has a lot of good lessons for us to look at. I also want to note, I believe the Attorney General's office is helping to lead a broader advisory and stakeholder group with members of the public, providers, members from the legal side and HHS side to talk about a comprehensive plan to address the full utilization of our opioid settlement dollars. You can see some of the meeting membership, the agendas and minutes that are housed on the HHS website, and that provides, I think, some information about how we plan to utilize these funds. And I want to commend them for bringing that group together and sharing some of that information. However, sadly, if you look at that website, they haven't really had any meetings or updates on those materials since October of 2022. In light of that fact, I did reach out to the key stakeholders and copied many members of relevant committees of jurisdiction in this body, inquiring as to any recent updates and plans to utilize the settlement funds to make sure that we have a chance to weigh in, particularly this session, if possible, on their utilization thereof. I want to also thank my friend Senator Clements for responding to that letter that I sent and directing my attention to the utilization of at least a small amount of the settlement funds that we have in hand to address opioid-related issues, behavioral health-related issues for first responders, which I think is a fantastic idea. But just wanted to flag that for the body kind of writ large. We really need to grapple with settlement funds in a thoughtful, uniform, and comprehensive manner. And we need to really keep our eyes on that significant amount of money that's going to come into the state from the opioid settlement and make sure it's directed really to behavioral health. Because that's the harm that is underlying those settlements. And we need to make sure those dollars, those one-time dollars in that settlement, thank you, Madam President, are not diluted for other purposes. So I understand that the conversations will continue, but that's an important part of not only our overall budgetary picture, but our legislative oversight. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Madam President. I think we are getting close to closure. I see someone else is in the queue, so I think I'll yield my time so that they can finish out so I can talk to the clerk. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, I rise in opposition to LB 818 because of the decision of funding for another prison in Nebraska without any plan to decommission or, for the future of the Nebraska State Penitentiary as it stands right now. In Lincoln specifically, all over the state and to an impressive degree, but in Lincoln we have a wonderful branding agency called Arch Rival, and they actually did the branding for Red Bull. So this, if you are into Formula One racing, you see the Red Bull car, they're the best team this year, they were the best team last year. Not my favorite team, I'm not a Red Bull person at all, but that design came from Lincoln, and that's something that we can be very proud of. Not knowing who did the design though for the iconic Kool-Aid packet Mountain Berry Punch, that's something I'm going to be looking into over the next couple days. And I bet that there's actually somebody perhaps at that branding agency who knows the answer to that, because these kinds of iconic designs, whether you're talking about the Java Cup or the Jazz Cup or any other kind of iconic thing that we would even see in this room around us, the design community has fans, and I'm sure there's somebody who knows the answer to that. Getting back to Matt from Dinosaur Dracula, his description of a 1989 packet of Mountain Berry Punch, the Kool-Aid smelled, looked, and tasted like unsettled strawberry jello. It didn't have too much tartness or acidity. I'm guessing it was meant to be Kool-Aid's dark and sophisticated flavor, because nothing moves posh foodies like an image of the Kool-Aid man scaling mountains to fetch cartoon strawberries. Right off the bat, you'll find within the community a debate over whether or not you can or should drink decades-old Kool-Aid. As Matt sees it, quote, "The drinking thing is overstated. It happens, but rarely. You can and you can't." Or maybe I should say, you shouldn't, but I have. While it's probably true that not many vintage Kool-Aid packet collectors are paying exorbitant prices with the sole intention of drinking their way through their collection, Matt does acknowledge that, quote, "If you were ever going to eat old junk food, I suppose Kool-Aid is one of the safer bets." I also want to say that I do not endorse eating expired food, and I'm not telling any Nebraskans to do that. Quote, "My interest in Kool-Aid is on the extreme side," Matt says, "but what I found through covering it is that Kool-Aid seems to make everyone happy, whether it reminds them of some long ago family picnic or using the stuff to badly dye their hair in high school. It weirdly connects so many personal memories. It's kind of a mutant version of Proust's Madeleines. If the Portkey connection between a wall-busting anthropomorphic drink pitcher and one of the premier French novelists of the 20th century seems potentially tenuous, it's helpful to contextualize Kool-Aid's quietly persistent presence that spans almost a century. Kool-Aid was first conceived in the late 1920s by entrepreneurial inventor Edwin Perkins as primarily a means to save money. At that time, one of the top sellers in his catalog of household goods was Fruit Smack, a fruit-flavored liquid concentrate housed in 4-ounce glass bottles. In an effort to reduce shipping costs and eliminate breakage losses, Perkins developed a powdered version that could be sold in small envelopes. His Kool-Aid debuted in 1927, spelled ADE like lemonade. The name was officially tweaked to Kool-Aid, AID, about 7 years later, with a variety of flavor envelopes promising to generate 10 drinks for only 10 cents. Kool-Aid's cultural entrenchment started almost immediately.
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Shortly after its creation, the Great Depression hit and Perkins cut the price of his product in half. Yet even at just 5 cents an envelope, Kool-Aid was generating over 1.5 million in annual net sales by the mid-1930s. This is a great example of a business owner, a producer, cutting prices when times get tough instead of, giving into inflation and jacking up prices. We know that things along the supply chain have become more expensive for a lot of producers and a lot of manufacturers in the United States of America. But we also see from the profit returns on these publicly traded companies that a lot of the profits and payments to C-level executives have spiked. They're higher than ever. And this is a great example of a Nebraska entrepreneur who chose to cut the costs for people in a time of hardship instead of raising his own salary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Hunt. Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on your desk?
I do, Madam President. Senator Arch would move to invoke cloture on LB 818 pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10.
Senator Arch, for what purpose do you rise?
Call the House. Roll call vote.
There has been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor, vote aye. Those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
22 ayes, 2 nays, place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized persons, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, Raybold, Day, Bostar, Wayne, Brewer, Dungan, Hanson, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. Senator Wayne, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. All unexcused members are now returned to the chamber. Members, the first vote is the motion to invoke cloture. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. There's been a request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Aguilar, Senator Albright, Senator Arch, voting yes. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, voting yes. Senator Boston, voting yes. Senator Bostar, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator Breezy, voting yes. Senator John Cavanaugh, not voting. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, not voting. Senator Clements, voting yes. Senator Conrad, voting yes. Senator Day, not voting. Senator DeBoer, voting yes. Senator DeKay, voting yes. Senator Dorn, voting yes. Senator Dover, voting yes. Senator Dungan, voting yes. Senator Erdman, voting yes. Senator Frederickson, voting yes. Senator Holleran, voting yes. Senator Hanson, voting yes. Senator Hardin, voting yes. Senator Holcroft, voting yes. Senator Hughes, voting yes. Senator Hunt, voting no. Senator Ibaugh, voting yes. Senator Jacobson, voting yes. Senator Kauth, voting yes. Senator Linehan, voting yes. Senator Lippincott, voting yes. Senator Lowe, voting yes. Senator McDonald, voting yes. Senator McKinney, Senator Mosier, voting yes. Senator Merman, voting yes. Senator Raybold, voting yes. Senator Reapy, voting yes. Senator Sanders, voting yes. Senator Slama, voting yes. Senator Vargas, voting yes. Senator Von Gillern, voting yes. Senator Walls, voting yes. Senator Wayne, not voting. Senator Wishart, voting yes. Vote is 41 ayes, 1 nay, Madam President, on the motion to invoke cloture.
The motion to invoke cloture is adopted. Colleagues, the next vote is AM 1727 as an amendment to LB 18. All those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
1 A, 38 nays, Madam President, on the adoption of the amendment.
The next vote is the advance to ENR for engrossing. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. LB 818 is advanced. Mr. Clerk. I raise the call.
Mr. Clerk, next item.
Mr. President, some items quickly. Amendments to be printed, Senator Boastar to LB 727, Senator Hansen to LB 818, and Senator Michaela Cavanaugh to LB 243. Next item on the agenda, Mr. President, select file Legislative Bill 243. First of all, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, a priority motion, would move to bracket Legislative Bill 243 until June 2nd, 2023.
Senator Kavanaugh, you're welcome to open on your bracket motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues. Okay. So I see the queue is quite full. Everybody loves to talk about taxes. The bracket motion is the bracket motion that, back when we, on day 50, changed the rules, filed a whole bunch of proactive motions. So I stand up and I'm like, oh, here's a motion for me today. Okay, I guess I'm opening on this motion since I filed this motion. All right, let's pull up LB 243 on select file. I have a binder on this, but if anybody who sees my desk, it's like a hodgepodge of binder activity. So, all right, LB 243 came out of committee 7-1. It had a lot of agricultural people in support. Tax Policy Institute Open Sky in opposition. Summary. LB 243 amends the Property Tax Credit Act to increase, beginning in 2024, the maximum relief granted under the act from $275 million to $700 million, with an allowable increase every year after 2024. Thank you, Mr. President. With an allowable increase every year after 2024 equal to the percentage increase in total assessed value of the real property in the state over the past year. AM 940 adds the following amounts in these given years. Tax year 2024, $388 million. It's hard. There's a period and 00. So I, for a second, was like, 388 billion? No, it's million. 2025, 428 million. 2026, 468 million. 2027, 488 million. 2028, 515 million. 2029, 560 million, and then proceed to the growth rate stated above. Explanation of amendments. AM 977 incorporates the provisions of 5 other property tax related bills into the LB 243. LB 28, as amended by the committee, modified version of AM 351, LB 242 as amended by AM 956, LB 309, LB 589 as amended by AM 933, and LB 783 as amended by the committee modified version. I was looking for a Post-it note that I had sitting on my lamp here for a while, and I think I just took it off and threw it away yesterday, and it was a list of bill numbers, and I think it was the bill numbers that are in this bill. So kind of lost track of the bill. Oh, pardon me. I apologize. Okay. The committee voted to adopt AM 977 in 8-0 vote. LB 28 would require the valuation of a property that currently has an appeal to the Tax Equalization and Review Commission that has not been decided when the first half of taxes become delinquent, to revert said valuation to the value of the year prior to the appealed year, AM 351 to LB 28, and a make it so amendment to LB 28. Would Senator Breezy yield to a question?
Senator Breezy, will you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. What is a, quote, make it so amendment? I'm not familiar with that.
A make it so amendment, my understanding is an amendment that hadn't been drafted prior to the time that it was adopted, and it was explained in a certain way, and staff is corrected to make an amendment so to reflect the understanding of a committee.
So it's what you directed the staff to do? Would you mind just for the mic?
Yes, I think that's a fair statement.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. I wasn't familiar with the statement, and so I was curious. I appreciate the clarification. And sorry, Senator Breezy nodded his answer to me, and I wanted to let him, for the record, state it. So thank you, Senator Breezy. Okay, so make it so amendment to LB 28 adds interest determined by the post-judgment interest rate shown in Nebraska Revised Statute Section 45-103 applied to the tax liability of the valuation difference of the Tax Equalization and Review Commission's decision has higher valuation than the one reverted to. Okay. And if anybody wants to look up what we're talking about, you can look up Revised Statute 45-103. Okay, that motion was 8-0. Transfers, testifiers on LB 28. Didn't have any, it did have an opponent. NACO was the opponent. So Senator Erdman's bill and LB 28. So it did have an opponent. Maybe the Make It So amendment addresses that. And there is a committee statement, a separate committee statement for LB 28, which people can look at. AM 351 requires that the decision of the Tax Equalization and Review Commission returns an amount that is higher than the amount reverted to. The property owner must pay the taxes on the additional amount with incurred interest from the date it was reverted to at an interest rate of that set in Nebraska Revised Statute 45-301 plus 3%. Okay. Gosh, I have too many tabs open. I still have tabs open on the previous bill, so gotta get back to that. Okay. LB 28, LB 242 amends the Nebraska Property Tax Incentive Act to eliminate the cap on allowable growth percentage and reset the credit percentage under the act to allow a percentage that will allow for $1 billion in credit under the act in 2024. In subsequent years, the credits will be the prior year's credits plus the annual growth percentage defined under the act as the percentage increase, if any, in the total assessed value of all real property in the state from the prior year to the current year as determined by the Department of Revenue. AM 956 also removes the current 5% cap on the allowable growth percentage on the LB 1107 2020 refundable income tax credit. Motion, so, just a random thought. So we always talk about LB 1107, talk about 1107, 1107, 1107. And like for me, when you say 1107, I will always think of that as the tax incentive package. I wonder if next year or in another biennium, Bill 1107 will be something of massive significance that will then confuse people when they're talking about 1107. They'll be like, are you talking about the 2024 1107 or the 2020 1107? And then you can't call it 1107 anymore. You got to like call it the Imagine Act or whatever it was called. So I think I'm about out of time. Wow, that is a really full queue. People are very excited to talk about taxes tonight. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Breezy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good evening, colleagues. I clearly rise in support of LB 243 and in opposition to the bracket motion. And at some point, we're going to want to get to an amendment on 243. That particular amendment is going to be an amendment to the ENR amendment, AM 1743. And it's going to be important that we get there. I will talk in detail about it later, but AM 1743 contains several suggestions that Bryce Wilson of NDE brought to us, and I would consider them cleanup suggestions. It also inserts some language to address concerns of some of our rapidly growing school districts. Also adjusts some of the numbers to help ensure balance within the tax packages. Eliminates one provision and also changes some dates. But again, we'll talk about that later when we get close to it. But at this point, I think I'd just like to talk about, remind everyone of what LB 243 does, what the ENR amendment does, and remind everyone of the importance of getting this passed. LB 243 increases the statutory minimum in the property tax credit fund over the next 6 years, and then contains an escalator after that. The escalator would be based on the annual increase in valuation of real property across the state. Another section brings in an amended version of my LB 242, which deals with the Property Tax Incentive Act credit, which Senator Kavanaugh mentioned a little bit ago, what I would consider the 1107 credit. After tax year 2023, the total amount of that credit grows at the allowable growth rate, which is defined as the percentage increase in any of the total assessed value of all real property in the state from the prior year to current year. And that increase is currently capped at 5% per year. LB 243, the ENR amendment would remove the 5% cap on the allowable growth rate. The next component includes the tax asking cap of my LB 589. And however, it is a soft cap, but in a nutshell, it limits the school's overall annual increases in total revenue to 3%. The school's property tax asking authority is then adjusted to meet that 3% limit. But we need to remember this 3% limit is adjusted upward for growth in student enrollment, poverty student growth, and LAP student growth. And note that this limit can be exceeded by a 70% vote of the school board or 60% vote of the public. And this limit does not apply to grants, bonds, voter approved, or QC-Puff bonds. And it really is a very reasonable measure that accommodates many, I would say most, if not all of the concerns of school districts. It's much less onerous than things we've talked about in past years. And I think it's really, again, does accommodate the concerns of public education in Nebraska, but still accomplishes the goals we're seeking to accomplish. And the next portion is Senator Merman's essentially LB 783. And it keeps in place a refundable tax credit for community college taxes paid, but at 100% of those taxes paid. But it also takes away the ability of community colleges to levy property taxes beginning in fiscal year 24-25. But those dollars are then replaced by the state in an amount equal to the taxes levied in 23-24, increased by 3.5%. And that's kind of a very cursory explanation of that bill. I'm sure Senator Merman might want to explain it in further detail at some point. But it's my understanding that the community colleges generally support the concept, taking away their taxing authority, but replacing it with state revenue that's going to increase automatically over the years, but allowing them to regain that taxing authority if we fall short on our commitment to them.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Another section represents Senator Bostar's LB 309, providing that for any property tax refund, interest is to be paid at 14% instead of the current 9%. And finally, we have Senator Erdman's, I believe it's the provisions of LB 28, and it does a couple of things, adds a commissioner to the Tax Rate Equalization and Review Commission, and also provides a valuation adjustment in the event of Turk appeals. And I think that's a provision that we're attempting to pull out with this amendment. And so that's essentially in a nutshell what LB 243 does. It's an important component of the tax package that we've been talking about in this body for several weeks, if not months now. And we need to see this bill through. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Linehan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of LB, can't see, LB 243, and also of Senator Breezy's amendment that we would like to get to. The amendment is obviously cleanup amendments are very helpful, and I think there's an amendment that helps a handful of schools that are fast-growing districts, and I hope we can get to it. There's a lot of talk about unsustainability of the tax cuts today, and I've read Open Skies deal they put out, I think, earlier today. They're always using the out-year numbers here when they say how much it's going to cost. So be very leery. I would suggest, if you want to understand the bill, the fiscal note revision 01 lays it out very well about and our fiscal office is still over here. I think they took the night. They are not here, but they've been here all day and they did a great job. But it lays it out very well as to what each part cost. And I think if you have questions, the Revenue Committee will be on the floor. We're happy to help understand any part of it. What we're doing is this is part of the whole plan. So we have the school funding bill, which we did yesterday. We had the budget with the $1.25 billion for the education fund, which is part of the budget. And now we get to the property taxes. And this is what we are actually doing here that I'm very proud of, is we are taking community colleges off the property tax rolls, except for their bonding. So I question really why community colleges were ever put on property tax rolls. I'm guessing, though I have not, and this is a guess, I'm guessing it was because community colleges were pulled together in the early 70s, in the 60s. The people of Nebraska told the Nebraska Legislature, the governor, we're not going to pay property taxes to the states anymore. So this was a way to kind of skirt around that. Our university does not get property taxes. Our state colleges do not get property taxes. Our community colleges are critically important, and we should be paying for them just like we are paying for all higher education. It shouldn't be on the property tax rolls. And I will give credit where credit due. The community colleges worked really hard to get to some agreements. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the bill, there is an escape hatch if we don't keep our commitment and keep them where they would be on property taxes, then they get to go back and collect property taxes. So I think that's a pretty good guarantee that the legislature will keep taking care of our community colleges, which are critical to our state. And I know Senator Breezy can explain this far better than me, but the cap is a soft, when we say soft cap, it just takes a supermajority of the school board to override it. And there's limits to how far they can override it. And they can also have an override of your whole district, the people. But if you look at most school board votes, with the exception of maybe 2 districts, or maybe there's some that aren't in the papers that I don't see out west, generally when school boards are pretty collaborative and they all agree to agree, and most of their votes are like 7-0, 6-0. So I think this is a very livable plan.
1 minute.
I know that Senator Breezy spent hours and hours. He was on the governor's committee that looked at this before the governor was sworn in. And I'm proud of this work, and I would ask for your support, and hopefully we can get to those amendments that would make the bill better. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Brandt, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, thank you, Senator Breezy, for bringing this bill. This is a very important bill to rural Nebraska because it targets the property tax relief that we talk so often about here on the floor. And it helps in particular those rural landowners in the state of Nebraska. What I'd like to focus on is what Senator Linehan has already alluded to, and that's our community colleges. We've got 6 community colleges in the state. They are great schools. I have a son that graduated from Southeast Community College, and he worked with Senator Linehan's brother, who also works at the community college, trying to teach these farm kids how to farm, and does a great job. So what does this bill do for community colleges? Last year, we passed the tax bill, I believe it was 873, and in 873, there was a 5-year runway to eliminate up to $190 million of community college, what we pay to community colleges on our property taxes. And this was the first year where you got 20% of that back on the refundable state income tax credit. So this year, not only did you get what that property paid to the K-12 school district, you got 20% of what that property paid to the community college district you were in. And had this plan not come up, over the course of 5 years, you would have got probably the equivalent of about 75% to 80% of what that property pays to the community college. What 243 does is it takes that final step. It goes up to, I believe, and Senator Breezy will have to correct me, but I think we're going to $234 million or $240 million, and that's 100% in the state of Nebraska what is paid. And I think where I get a little confused, because we had a 5-year runway, and now 243 adds some more money on top of that, and we have shortened the runway. I guess I would like to ask Senator Breezy if he would answer a question.
Senator Breezy, will you yield?
Yes.
Senator Breezy, under 243, because we have an existing program that we started last year, and this will modify that program, how many years now will it take to get reimbursement on the community colleges?
I'd have to look for sure. I might have to ask Senator Merman that question, but I think it's tax year 25, it's 100%, 24, 25, but it's coming right upon us. I'd have to look at it and see for sure.
Certainly. So about 2 years, then we would be at 100%.
Yes, very much accelerated compared to what we put in place in 823 or whatever it was, or 873. And like you said, when we got to the max on that, we'd only been 70 or 75% of the total probably.
And then alluding to what Senator Linehan said about levy authority, so the fear on any of our school funding, community colleges included, is that someday the state may be short of money and short these colleges. We left in there the ability to levy property taxes if the state would decrease this amount. Would that be correct?
Yes, if the state doesn't meet its obligation under the statute, they would regain their taxing authority to make them whole.
And this just pertains to the reimbursement for the operating expenses. If I'm in Southeast Community College, if they want to build a new science building or something like that, they still have the ability to bond and ask the people for a vote of the people.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. I appreciate that. As a farmer, I can tell you on an irrigated quarter section in my neighborhood, Southeast Community College is about $200 or more per quarter section. That may not sound like much, but getting that money back into the hands of the property taxpayer, even if you have to go through the refundable state income tax credit, is a good thing. I would encourage everybody to support LB 243 and the amendment when it hits the board. Thank you.
Senator Holdcroft, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I wanted to revisit the Make It So order, which we use a lot in the military, particularly in the Navy. So put yourself on the bridge of a U.S. destroyer, officer of the deck. The officer of the deck is the individual who controls the movement, and he'll report to the captain that he has a contact, say, off the 2 points off the starboard bow, which has a constant bearing, decreasing range. And what that means is he's on the same bearing, but his range is decreasing on that bearing. And if nothing changes, then you're going to have a collision. And I'm here to tell you, a collision at sea, it will ruin your whole day. So he will then make a recommendation. He'll say, Captain, I recommend you come right. We come right to 045. That will give us a closest point of approach of about 5,000 yards. 5,000 yards, about 2.5 miles. So yeah, that sounds pretty good. So then if the captain, if he's happy with that, he'll say, make it so. And then the officer of the deck will carry out that recommendation. But we're here to talk about property taxes, and so I'll take you back to campaigning. I only knocked on 5,000 doors. I know Senator Lippincott did 6,000 doors, but my introduction at the door was Rick Holcroft. I'm running for the state legislature. I'm pro-life, retired military, and that really rings pretty good in my district. Seemed to work. But, every once in a while we get around to property taxes, and people are concerned about property taxes. And the first thing I have to explain to them was property taxes are locally assessed, they are locally collected, and they are locally spent. So at the state level, there are just a limited number of things that we can do. But we do have a pretty good reserve fund surplus, and we're going to work on a way to try to turn that into property tax relief. And that seemed to satisfy most folks. So here we are. We have this pretty good plan, I think, to do that. I would also explain to them that the way property taxes work is we have a number of what we call political entities locally, and those are your cities and counties and school boards. Used to be community colleges. We also had that authority to put a levy on your house, and a levy is simply a percentage that's applied to the value of your house, and that's what results in your property tax. Now, a lot of people don't really appreciate how much of their monthly loan payment goes to property tax, because what the banks do, and they're not stupid. Banks are not stupid. They don't want to lose your house because you're not paying your property tax or insurance. So they include your property tax and your insurance into your monthly loan payment. So until you pay off your house, I think you don't have a very good appreciation for how much of your monthly mortgage payment is actually going to property tax. But I would estimate it's probably about 1/3 of that monthly payment is going to property tax. So that's how it's assessed. So how does the state help out with the property tax? And it's been alluded to before. We really do it 3 different ways. The first thing we do is there's a flat rate. You'll see it on your annual bill right across the top. State contribution to property tax. It's where we're taking our gambling profits and everything. We put that into that fund, and then we apply that, and you get a percentage of the value of your house is applied directly by the state to your property tax. And the second way was also just alluded, was that we look at the largest percentage of property tax is for education. So a bill passed in the last session allows you to figure out exactly how much you're paying based on your school district to how much of your property taxes are paid to education, and there was a deduction that you could have taken. Now it's an extra step when you file your income tax. Not everybody's picking it up. I think we only had about a 60% rate a couple years ago. We're working on trying to improve that, but you can apply for that also, and that's the second way that you can reduce your property taxes, or the state can help you reduce your property tax. And then the third way is what we're trying to do now with this bill, and that is to is to set aside, and it's 3 bills. And I think I'll yield the rest of my time and come back to that on another visit. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Merman, you're recognized.
Good evening, Mr. Speaker and Nebraskans. I rise tonight in strong support of LB 243 and against the bracket motion. This turn on the mic, I'd like to talk about my portion of the revenue property tax package. This is the amended version of LB 783 that I introduced at the request of the governor. Introduced, this bill would have ended property tax levy authority for the community colleges and called for the funding of these institutions through the state. Each year, the state will raise community college funding by 3.5%. Under the amended version of this bill, the community colleges will maintain limited levy authority, and only if the state fails in its obligation of appropriating the 3.5% increase in funding each year. And what property tax levying authority that is retained by the community colleges will be a 100% credit on against your income tax bill. So it does eliminate, essentially eliminate property taxes on community colleges. So the community colleges will maintain their ability to levy property taxes to cover bonds. I would like to point out the critical work our community colleges are doing. Nebraska has a critical workforce shortage, and our community colleges are working overtime to get those spots filled and build up our local communities. Some of the industries that community colleges do teach are education, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, trade, construction, etc. The district I represent, District 38, is covered by Central Community College at Hastings and Mid-Plains Community College in McCook. I have seen firsthand the value of these two institutions bring to my community, and I am positive many of you can say the same about Southeast, Metro, Western, and Northeast community college systems. To summarize, this section of the package will provide immediate dollar-for-dollar relief to property tax payers and secures reliable revenue streams that allow our community colleges to grow. Again, I would like to thank Governor Pillen, Senator Linehan, the Revenue Committee, and our great Nebraska community colleges that have worked to get this legislation to this point. Thank you, and I'll yield my time back.
Senator Jacobson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too rise in support of LB 243 and the ultimate amendment that will be added to this bill. There has been a lot of hard work that went into this, and this is a part of the budget package that I am most interested in. I think, like most other rural senators, property taxes are a big deal. Our property taxes are so far out of line with regard to all of the states around us that it has put us at a huge competitive disadvantage. And I can tell you that as I get around the country and speak with various people and they look at making an investment in farmland, that Nebraska would be one of the last places they would come to because our property taxes are so high. With that said, I would tell you that as I look at farmers and ranchers and I look at the burden that they pay, and I think it's important to note in those cases in particular, it doesn't matter whether they have a crop failure like we saw in many of the dryland areas in my district and across the state last year. Your property taxes aren't reduced. You still pay the full property tax. regardless of the revenue you produce. If you're a rancher, it doesn't matter if you don't produce grass. It doesn't matter if you have to sell off the cow herd or reduce your cow herd because the grass didn't grow because you didn't get moisture. You still pay your property taxes. When it comes to homeowners and apartment owners, they're paying these high property taxes as well. I know a lot of people say, when I make the statement, everyone who lives in a home or owns any real estate or rents real estate are paying property taxes. And I get all the emails that say, no, I rent, so I don't pay any property taxes. But I can assure you that whoever owns your apartment or the home that you rent, they indeed are paying property taxes, and that gets factored into what you pay for rent. I know there's a lot of people that believe that if there's an apartment owner out there, that property is free and clear and that's just an investment and it doesn't matter what they get for revenue. But I can assure you, in many cases, there's a lender on the other side of that. And I can tell you there were a lot of nervous moments during the pandemic when we had these moratoriums on rent being paid, and these property owners were trying to figure out how they were going to make the payments to the bank because they still had payments they had to make every month. And I can also assure you that if you look at rents and people say, well, if we give these property tax breaks, is my rent going to go down? I think you got to look at it more from the standpoint as, will my rent go up as much? Because that's what's happening right now. Look at what's happened to interest rates. And I can assure you that when the Federal Reserve decided to go on this march and raised interest rates almost 550 basis points or 5.5 percentage points, factor that into what an apartment owner is going to pay if their loan's coming due and they're going to have to renew that loan. Think about what they're going to pay in additional interest. They're not going to be able to pass that through because they can't get that much rent. But I can tell you these property tax reductions will make a difference for them, and it'll make a difference in what you pay for rent. At the end of the day, property taxes have not been in line with revenues produced, particularly in ag land. But I can tell you it's been over the top for homeowners and for farmers and ranchers, and it's time for that to stop. And we're making a big step forward with this bill. And I'm really pleased that it's moving forward. I would also tell you that we need to keep in mind, as we've talked, that the dollars are going to go to the public schools. It's going to have a soft cap. Thank you, Mr. President. We'll have a soft cap. You will be able to override it. When I look in the smaller school districts, you could have you could override it by an additional 7%. So you could actually move your budget up 10% and still be in compliance, as long as you get 70% of the school board members to go along with it. This bill makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. I'm glad it's here. For the first time in a long time, we're going to actually get real property tax reduction on the top line in addition to the income tax refund. It's a great step forward. Thank you, Senator Breezy, for championing this. Thank you, Revenue Committee, for bringing it forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Von Gillern, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pleased to follow Senator Jacobson, and it reminded me of some comments that he made this afternoon that I wanted to echo from the previous conversation about the appropriations bill. And one of the comments that he made was that the reason we have too much money in the budget is because we've collected too much from the taxpayers. And it's reminiscent of when I was campaigning this last year and going door to door. And I'm sure others that were campaigning would echo the same comments and say that the number one thing that was raised, the number one topic that was raised on front door steps was property taxes. You're knocking on people's doors, you're at their home. Some of that was seasonal, of course, during tax season. And actually, I think I've shared this story before. I think I won some votes from some people because during tax season, I would ask them about the property tax credit, and many of them didn't know about it. So had the opportunity to explain that to them and allow them to take advantage of that property tax credit in their income taxes. So it was a good way to win some fans, a good way to win some votes. But again, I think philosophically speaking, I think we have a philosophical difference with some folks when we say that we believe that the money that is in the coffers of the state is not ours. It's ours to manage, it's ours to steward, and we came here to do that well. And I know that it's the best intent of all 49 senators in this room to do that. We see how to do that differently sometimes. But again, cutting taxes begins with giving back the money that we have that we don't need for necessary and important expenditures of the state to do the primary job that we were elected to do. So that's the first place I want to start, is reminding it that it's not our money, it is the taxpayers. People would ask, how are you going to cut taxes? Every politician says they want to cut taxes. And I would tell them the first thing to do is to give you back the money that we have that's already yours, that we don't need to operate the state. I looked back this past year, and like many in the room, and I know others have shared, I don't do my own taxes. That's something best left to experts, that I believe. And I own my home and a commercial piece of property and a farm property, so it gets fairly complicated. So those taxes are done by others, but I do make sure and look and make sure that I got the credits that were due to me. And I do live in a high levy district, high school tax levy district. But I look back and my property taxes were cut by about 15% in this past year. So it's a substantial savings. I know not everybody will see that rate. It'll vary somewhat, but it made a big difference for me in my home. By increasing the dollars that go into that property tax credit fund, which is one of the bills that we've got wrapped up in this package, we'll be able to increase that credit and increase the kind of artificially cut property taxes for Nebraskans. It's a left-handed way to do it, but that's the system that's in place, so we'll continue to do that. The community college reductions that were spoken of earlier are another substantial way to cut property taxes, and the numbers that I've been reading on that is it'll cut property tax by around 6% for most homeowners. So if I take the 15% or so that, at least in my personal story, and add 6 to that, we're over 20%. I'm at 21% reduction in my taxes, and that's substantial. It doesn't matter who you are or what your district is. I'll take a 21% reduction any day. Through all that, we're still supporting schools through the Education Trust Fund. We've got funding going directly to the school districts. Again, that has been spoken of today. And then the SPED funding, the $7,500 per student SPED funding. And even considering thank you, Mr. President. Again, considering the reductions, I'm looking forward to a substantial savings or an increased savings going forward. I'll begin an article that I've got here, and I'll continue that my next time on the mic. That was written recently by Jim Vogel. In fact, I just received it today. And it says, imagine this familiar scene. Nebraskans from all walks of life gather around the kitchen table or local coffee shops, commiserating over the burden of their high property taxes. It's a story shared by families and individuals throughout our state, echoing the frustrations of a system that seems to work against them. As I've traveled across Nebraska over the last decade, I've consistently heard concerns about workforce needs, affordable housing, broadband deployment, and keeping more of what you earn. Yet one issue rises above all the rest: Nebraska's property taxes. And I'll finish on my next time on the mic. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Lowe, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too, when I was out campaigning, gosh, now 8 years ago, doesn't seem that long, but it's been 8 years since I was out originally campaigning. First time for an elected office. And almost every house I went to, and unlike Senator Holdcroft and Senator Lippincott, I tried to hit every house except for the one street my opponent was on, because I knew he had that street pretty much wrapped up. So I knocked on all these doors, and what was their number one ask? And that was, what are you going to do about my taxes? My taxes are too high. I can go down to Kansas and live like I'm living now and have money in the bank where I don't have it now. What are you going to do? What are you going to do about my property taxes? And I had the same response as Senator Holdcroft. Well, that's a local issue. They raise the taxes and the levies, and that goes into the cities and the counties. And they go, but what are you going to do about that? Well, for the first 4 years or 5 years that I would go home, I would say, we're working on it. We're going to get there. We're working on it. And they would grumble at me. This year, I have been stopped every time I've gone back to Kearney by people. Every time I've gone back by somebody thanking me for the property tax relief that they have finally gotten. And now we want to continue that. We want to make that more for the people of Nebraska, because this is not our money. This is not the state's money. Like Senator Von Gilleren said, it's the people's money that we are stewards of, and we should be very good stewards of their money. It's been an honor because my class has two champions that have really championed this effort, and that is Senator Breezy and Senator Linehan. They have worked endlessly to try to get tax relief to the people of Nebraskans. And I wish everybody in the state of Nebraska would send them an email. I don't know they want to open up that many emails thanking them for the property tax relief that they have given you. It's been amazing. And Senator Holdcroft, it sounds like the Navy has a long way of doing things. When you're heading for a ship and the first mate says, I think we need to turn 45 degrees to the right, instead of saying yes, you say make it so. I think yes is a lot simpler and a little clearer to most everybody on the floor. And for those of you that have not taken advantage of the property tax credit relief that we have, it's on the Nebraska Department of Revenue's website, about halfway down in red print. Please click on that. Please get your money back. It's yours. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hardin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of LB 243. I'm in opposition to the motion. A middle-aged farmer stood on my front porch one day with tears running down his face because he had just paid nearly $80,000 for his taxes. He did the math on what he had paid for the last 2 decades. He shared the enormous number with me, and then shared that he could not see a way to pass the multi-generational farm onto his own son. He could take the weather, he knew how to navigate the timing of the markets to some degree, but he had no hope for getting around the nightmare of property taxes in Scottsbluff County. He also did the math forward, thinking through what he would probably pay on the remaining 20 years of his career if he worked into his 70s. That drove him to declare that the margins are too thin, the inputs are too high, that the property tax mountain was too steep to climb. Grandparents are moving away from children and grandchildren so they can find a place they can afford to live in their golden years, because they cannot afford to stay in their paid-off middle-income home. The Tax Foundation ranks our state as having the 7th highest property tax rates in the country. We are the highest in the Midwest. That's significant because for those interested in living in the middle of the country, for those interested in returning to where they grew up, for those majority of college students who graduated from Nebraska and moved away and would like to move back, LB 243 is an opportunity to begin to change that environment, to improve it, to make it more attractive to move back to. I work with small businesses, entrepreneurs, and one of the first 3 items we help a small business to solve is where should they domicile their drain. The where question is tied at the hip to taxes, property taxes especially. We have an opportunity to change what many in Nebraska, when you're knocking door to door and learning about what's on people's hearts, we have an opportunity to change something substantively and for the better. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Dungan, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, colleagues. I know we have a number of people in the queue here tonight, so I'm probably only going to get to talk this one time, but we've had a robust conversation, I know already, about the taxes, both property and the income and the corporate taxes earlier today. I do rise still unsure about LB 243. Generally, I want to be very clear, I am in support of reducing property taxes. I think as Senator Holtzcroft talked about and a number of other folks that are here today who are new to this body, when we were out knocking doors for this campaign and we asked folks, what's the most important thing to you? I did hear from a number of my constituents that property taxes and property tax reduction was one of the most important issues to them. So when I came to this body, one of the things that I was committed to was absolutely lowering property taxes and finding a way to do that. So I want to be very clear that that is a priority for me, as well as I think all of my colleagues, because we all understand that property taxes are too high. And I've looked at the three-legged stool and understand that it's out of whack. And that's a thing that we've all talked about. So I think that we can all feel as though that's an issue that's very important here. One thing that I don't personally know, but I know from listening to my colleagues from more rural areas, is that it's an even more important issue for a number of folks in the rural communities. Obviously, home valuation here in Lincoln can be an issue sometimes, but I also understand that when you're talking about much larger swaths of land being valued at much larger amounts, the property tax issue, I think, hits home even more. So I do understand the concerns and the considerations of all of my colleagues. That being said, there are some things in this bill that I still do have some concerns about, which I did bring up on general file, and I just wanted to take this time to, I guess, voice a couple of those concerns, still understanding that we can continue to address them as time moves on. One of them overall, and I think again, colleagues have already talked about this, is a concern about the overall sustainability of the packages that we're talking about here. So earlier today, we discussed the movement of money from the cash fund, the cash reserve rather, over to the general fund. And that is clearly indicative of the fact that we do not have all of the money on the floor that we thought we had to pay for all of these different packages and reductions in revenue along with the appropriations. And so already, if we're having a conversation about what to approve and what not to approve, and we're needing to dip into that cash reserve, I think it's indicative of some of the concerns coming to fruition that we had expressed earlier. In addition to that, this package contains a number of bills. I want to take a second again to applaud Senator Breezy for the hard work he's done, I think, trying to bring a bunch of different stakeholders to the table and having conversations about what's important to those folks and how we can accommodate those. And I do want to say that in the Revenue Committee, it's very clear that he made a number of concessions to try to get some folks on board who might have been hesitant. A good example of that, but an area that I do still have concerns, is these caps that are being put in place with regard to schools' tax asking authority. I understand that there's a notion that they are soft caps, but a soft cap is still a cap. And I want to ensure that our schools have the possibility to grow when they need to, and that the ability to grow is commensurate with the amount of growth that's necessary for that school, depending on their needs. And so concerns that I had regarding that were, there's a couple of different layers. One, the amount with which a school can exceed its base authority is based on the amount of students that are enrolled in that school district or that school area. And so it seems especially problematic to me that urban areas have less growth than rural areas, given that a lot of the larger school districts are the ones that are most likely going to need, thank you, Mr. President, a larger amount of growth. And so I have concerns about the caps in general. I have concerns about even putting those caps in place in the first place. They may be a soft cap now, and you may think the growth rate allowable is appropriate now, but that does not mean that future legislatures won't come back and limit that growth. It doesn't mean that future legislatures won't make it harder for schools to have the growth they need. Now, LPS, I know, is not opposed to this, and I want to be very clear. They did take into consideration a number of the concerns from LPS as well as other school districts. But I remain concerned that putting this structure in place at all is going to put us in a bind in the future when schools may need to exceed that. There is a mechanism with which you can exceed that, and it involves a vote of either the school board or the people. I think some of my colleagues are probably going to speak a little bit more about that, but I do have concerns about the 60% vote of the public that's needed to exceed that tax asking authority, given that it does.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Dorn, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank everybody for the conversation here tonight. I want to thank also Senator Breezy for bringing this bill, and Senator Linehan for all their hard work. What Senator Lowe spoke about, that while we've been up here, or I've been up here the 4 years, they've generally been the leaders of bringing forward some policies so that we can address some of the tax issues. I, like many others have talked, when you talk to the people around the state or in your district, property tax is one of their main concerns or one of their main issues, especially when it happens like it's happened here now the last year, where valuations have gone up from 10 to 30%, sometimes in that higher range. Part of what this, the 243 bill does is it addresses some, I call it property tax credit fund, which is different than the one with the income tax property tax credit fund. This is the original one that I want to read some comments on page 44 of your budget book, a little bit about the history of it. It was started in about 2007 with $105 million in that credit fund. It's slowly grown to $115 million and in 09 to 14, and during the 2014 session, it increased to $140 million. In the 2015 session, the credit was increased by another $64 million to $204 million. So this fund, as you can see, has grown slowly over time. In 2016, one change was made to this. It took the total dollar amount, the $204 million, and it took the total amount of property taxes paid in the state, and it used those for calculations, and it came up with an amount you were adjusted for. And this is a tax that when you get your tax bill or your tax statement, that the property taxes that you owe for 23 here, you'll get it in December, that you owe for 24 and you will pay in 24. This, when you look at that statement, it will list from 5 to 8 to 10 different things that property taxes are calculated on your statement. There's schools, there's city, there's counties, and many other smaller ones. That total amount's added up. Then down at the bottom, there will be a negative number. That negative number is this property tax credit that the counties now don't bill you for that property tax amount. They don't bill you. They're giving you a negative amount on your total bill, and then the state reimburses them for that. So this is that property tax credit fund. Well, I said it went up to $224 million in 2016 or 2017. In 2019, this was increased to $275 million. And then it increased to, in 2021 and 2022, it increased to $300 and $313 million a year ago. Part of this bill now, we have included the next 2 years of this property tax credit fund in the budget. So in the whole bigger picture of the budget, another approximately $50 million have been included for the fiscal year 24, and that puts that up to, I believe, $365 million, and then the next year, it's going to go up to over $390 million for your property tax credit fund. So this is a fund that statewide, everybody gets to participate in. Every landowner, every house owner, every property owner gets this credit back on your property statement. Part of what you do when you look at the fiscal note, it also shows that in this bill 243, that is going to keep increasing for the next 4 to 5 years. And then it has a factor built in after that to increase to match some, I call it percentage increase in valuations, so that we, the state of Nebraska, are giving very much property tax relief here. And that the people of the state of Nebraska, when we talk about your property taxes, everybody knows what their statement is, everybody knows what they're paying, but there's a line on there, that minus line when you get that statement, that is what the state of Nebraska is reimbursing the counties, that they don't now charge you for that the state of Nebraska is paying
Senator.
those property taxes. Thank you.
Senator Kauth, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. In line with what Senator Dorn was saying, as I was door knocking last year, the postcards had just started to go out talking about the property taxes that people were paying. And I believe it was Senator Hansen's bill that made that possible. People were shocked and astounded at what their tax bills really were. And it gave people a chance to go and show up at these meetings. And I talked to some of the people who were hosting the meetings. They said, we've had maybe one person show up before, and now it's like 100. So this kind of transparency really does work, and it's very important for our citizens. This package of bills was actually designed to reduce property taxes, and it works in conjunction with the education package. It provides significant new assistance from the state to the schools with the establishment of the Education Future Fund, and that includes $1,500 per student, 80% special education, and $1 billion set aside for the first year, and then $300 million for the next several years. I can't stress enough how important it is that we are setting aside money for our education system. That means we won't have to take that money out of our taxes, and that means the schools can lower the property tax rate. We've set up a framework. We're ready for the school districts to lower their rates. We're ready for the community colleges to stop levying taxes. These plans will all work very, very well together. And I know everyone on the committee did a lot of work to make this happen. Thank you. I yield time.
Senator Bosselman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, colleagues. Good evening, Nebraska. Property taxes is always a topic that comes up that I'm always amazed at when people stand on the floor and say, well, I just don't know. I just don't know if we need to do property taxes. I just don't know whether we should do this or not. For the 7 years that I've been here, I don't know if there's one person that I've talked to in any meeting I've been into, cattlemen, Saunders County Livestock Association, corn growers, whether it's knocking on doors in town, in the community, the number one thing that always comes up is property taxes. What are you gonna do about property taxes? When are you gonna lower my property taxes? I can't afford it anymore. This is gonna cause me to lose my house. What are you going to do about it? LB 243 I support, and takes another step in the right direction. I oppose motion 169. I want to read you some emails I have, and we're going to start generational. So my first emails I want to read to you. They're brief, they're short, but I think they're a good point across when we look at this bill and what we need to do. I think we need to do more. This doesn't do enough. We need to do a lot more for Nebraskans. But having said that, the first letters I'm going to read are from high school students this year, seniors from my district. First one says, in my government class, we're supposed to write a letter to the senator. I have a few questions for you and some responses. My first one is, why are the property taxes on farmland so expensive in District 23? My question is, if it's just used for farmland, why don't we just lower the taxes because they are helping the government with resources and products for the people? I feel you should try and lower the taxes on farmland and make it so people can help the government. And it would make people want to farm and farm more because it wouldn't be so expensive. I hope you understand since you're a farmer and from a small town in Nebraska. Another high school student, I'm sending a letter to you to talk to you about your thoughts on property taxes going on in Nebraska. I don't personally agree with the property taxes being so high. I wish it was cheaper for landowners in Nebraska. Paying over $3,000 for property taxes in a year is unnecessary. I would like to see the state lower the property taxes. I would like to see landowners in Nebraska not worry about it so much. So let's skip a generation or two. We have way higher taxes than any other states around. We need to be doing what other surrounding states are doing, or we're going to be lagging behind them. Change the way ag land is being taxed. Iowa is paying probably 1/3 or less of property taxes than we are. In the states like Missouri or Kansas, it's even cheaper. Something has changed in the past couple of years, and the unicameral isn't changing it back. I'm asking, this is another one. I'm asking because forking up nearly $9,000 a year to live on a little 125-acre acreage is just ridiculous. There's no way this little farm can pay for that. Ask your fellow senators if there's a business in their city that they tax every dime of profit that they make every year just to pay the taxes on it. The last one I already read to you was about the woman, 66 years old, who has a house in a small village in my district. They raised the taxes on her home 3 times as much because one house in that village sold for more than the value of the house. She went to the county and did have it lowered to double instead of triple in taxes. But she says, I can't pay for it. I'm not going to be able to pay for it because I don't have the money to pay for it. And eventually someone's going to pay for my taxes and takes my house from me. Take my house from me. I own my house now, but someone's going to take my house from me because I can't pay the taxes on my house. Things must change.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Hunt, you are recognized. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ooh, sorry about that. That was not on purpose. So I rise in support of the bracket motion, I guess, in opposition to the bill in its current form. So I was just trying to do some quick math because on the last time around on this bill, I brought 2 amendments specific to the section about the levy override votes. And I talked about how my basis of my opposition to that, aside from my principled opposition, I guess, that we shouldn't put undue restrictions on local control and we should let those people make that decision. But, Senator Breezy, as I talked about, has worked in my 3 years here, he's worked on this issue a great deal and has made some concessions and things. But my opposition and my amendments were around the idea of having the public vote of the public for a levy override to lift the levy lid require 60% vote. And so I brought 2 separate amendments about that. And the basis of my opposition was that our Constitution has stated how we should conduct votes of the public. And so initiative referendum, signatures required. So I was trying to look up this part. Here we go. So this is Article 3, Section 4, initiative or referendum, signatures required, veto, election returns, constitutional amendments, nonpartisan ballot. A measure initiated shall become a law or part of the Constitution, as the case may be, when a majority of the votes cast thereon, and no less than 35% of the total vote cast at the election at which the same was submitted are cast in favor thereof, and shall take effect upon the proclamation of the governor. But so basically what that means is, we have a referendum process in our Constitution, and it allows for citizen referendum, and the vote on that is a simple 50%. So the Constitution says how we should do these referendums. I think it's a bad idea for us to diverge from that referendum threshold for these levy overrides that are in this bill. And I would caveat, I guess, with it's 50%, but it has to be at least 35%. The 50% threshold has to be at least 35% of the votes cast in that election. So try to do some quick math here for you. If you say have an election in which there are 100 people vote, but only 60 of them vote in the levy override or the ballot initiative question. And so then 31 of them vote for the initiative. That initiative does not become law, though it's more than 50% of the ballots cast in the initiative. It's not more than 35% of the ballots cast in the election overall. So that's how the Constitution provides for making sure that it's not a low turnout election or a low participation issue on the ballot, but it still leaves it at 50% plus one of those voting on that particular question. And so I brought an amendment that would essentially adopt that language for the levy override initiatives. So the reason I'm talking about this now, aside from the fact that we're on this ballot or this issue, is that I just noted, I mentioned this to Senator Breezy earlier today, kind of in passing, but that there was a school bond issue in election last night in Omaha, at least District 66, West Side, in which 7,500 ballots were cast. 4,785 voted for it, 2,750 voted against. And this is the math I was trying to do when I got called up here. But so it's about a 66% of people voted in favor.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President, which would meet, if this were the levy override vote, would meet Senator Breezy's standard. But in my standard, you'd have to look at it. The suggestion I proposed, you'd have to look at the number of people who voted, and we'd have to do it in the primary election. So the most recent primary was 2022, and they had in West Side a ballot election. You'd have to get 35% of something along the lines of 8,000 people. So it would be a higher threshold, which I would say this would have met. But the 66%, clearly, people wanted this override, but that's just because they can achieve that higher threshold that Senator Breezy wants to set it at.
Time, Senator.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Halloran, you're recognized to speak. Senator Erdman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening. I'm going to speak briefly about Senator Breezy had made mention to the Turk amendment that was included in 243. And by the way, I want to thank the Revenue Committee and Senator Breezy for allowing me to attach this bill to this 243. I appreciate that a lot. So what we're doing is we're removing the portion of the Turk bill that said if you protest your valuation and you haven't had a hearing or a decision by Turk by the time your next tax statement is due, the value shall remain as it was when you filed your protest. And NACO has come and suggested that we get an Attorney General's opinion on that. And so rather than try to hold the bill up, I thought it was very expedient and wise that we would go ahead and strike that part of the amendment so that that wouldn't be a holdup. And so that is what that amendment does. And if you want to find that, it's the new language in section 16, which is found on page 30 in the ENR amendment. So that's where you find it. It's section 16, the new language on page 30 and 31. So now let me address a little bit about the property tax relief that we've been talking about on 243. Numerous people have said about the information they received by knocking on doors about lowering our property tax. Now, I don't want to sound disrespectful about 243 because Senator Breezy, Linehan, and others work extremely hard to bring us this bill to reduce our property tax by the amount that they have. And I appreciate that, and I will vote for 243. But I want you to know there is a better way. And Senator Bosselman was talking about those people losing their homes and their properties because of property tax. He read a bill, an email about the cost of ag land property tax. If you get a chance, take a look at epicoption.org, and it'll give you an idea how to fix our broken tax system. This system is broken. It's been broken ever since the first day they implemented it back in 1967. And if we don't go to the consumption tax proposal and adopt that, we will continue to do what we're doing here this evening for years to come. That's exactly what it does. This does not move us in any way, shape, or form ahead of any of our neighbors in taxation. And the only way that we're going to get ahead of those neighbors or move in front of any of those other states in the United States is to adopt the consumption tax, which is the tax that allows people to pay the amount they can afford to pay when they can afford to pay it by the things they consume. So for those of you who are listening and those of you in the room, if you haven't taken a look at the EPIC option, you need to do that because it is the answer. Because we will be back next year and the year after that doing more of the same things we've always done, and we will not move the needle far enough to get ahead of anyone. Because if we think Iowa's going to stay at 3.9 or the other states that we're in competition with near us, we'll never catch up with them. So we need to fix our broken tax system, and there's only one way to do that, and that's start over. So in 1966, when the voters passed a referendum that said no more property tax for the state implemented sales and income tax, and the original goal was to do that to lower property tax. And the voters decided they didn't want the state to have three forms of taxation, so they put it on the ballot and it passed. Well, we are doing a petition drive to get the consumption tax on the ballot. It is being very well received by the general public. When we have an opportunity to explain what this does for their property tax and their income tax, people are excited about signing the petition that actually is a solution instead of a Band-Aid on an amputation. So I will vote for 243 because until we get the consumption tax passed, it's better than what we currently have. But I just want you to know there is a better way. There is actually a real solution to our tax problem in the state of Nebraska. Thank you.
Senator Conrad, you are recognized to speak. Senator Vargas, you are recognized to speak. Senator John Kavanaugh, you are recognized to speak. Senator Vargas, you are recognized to speak.
I feel like that was, thank you very much, President, one of the quick drop right there. Thank you very much. I just wanted to weigh on this a little bit because I had good conversations with people off the mic. I voted for this in the first round and supported it. And there's a couple of reasons why, and a couple of reasons for caution on this. And I've said this in the past. Even when we are looking at the way that we are crafting our budget, and I know we're not talking about the budget, but this does impact when we can do and how much we can do of all the different tax cuts, and in particular for this bill, is we need to be very mindful about what is happening in the long term. The forecasting is helpful, and I know that there's very different interpretations from different people, both on revenue and on appropriations, and not on those committees in regards to what things are going to look like in the future in terms of the out years. And I know we had a bit of that debate in the last couple bills, but I think it is important to recognize what we have been able to do in the budget and why that impacts this legislation. Even under a very lean, I would say that this budget year, this biennium, has been extremely lean. And I say that because when you look at the composition of our committee and what we can come to consensus, there's not enough consensus to do more on many of the budget items that I would normally try to invest more in terms of like human investments. And what we have been really presented with, or what we've been able to come consensus to in terms of getting a majority of votes and support, has been a budget that is extremely lean. getting to about the 2.3%, like we are functioning on investing in salaries, in retirement payouts, in use of programs, in infrastructure of what is needed for agencies. When we're talking about the actual increase in the overall budget, that's what really is compromising the majority of the budget. And that got us to about 2.3%, right? I say that because that doesn't even include, that includes some of the initiatives that you've seen, especially from the governor's office. Some of those, or many of those, are one-time spends, even if you're looking at the canal and things like that. Now, the reason why I say this is because part of the reason, my opinion, but also grounded in a lot of the data, we're seeing the successful years of revenue. There's obviously this moment in time where we see this across the country, but in terms of Nebraska, we have seen a larger amount of revenue come in, and part of that is due to the fact that our Appropriations Committee has been very lean over the last 6 years. We've spent a lot of time, whether you agree or don't agree, with being very fiscally responsible with our state funds and taxpayer money. Very fiscally responsible with how we are spending the money, and the growth of spending and the biennium budgets over the last 3 biennium. Extremely. I've had this conversation with Senator Dorn several times. We have been very, very lean, and we were forced to in the first couple of bienniums, but even the last 2 bienniums we have been. And after many years, just like our own budgets, of being lean, and with the revenues coming in, that's where we even have even more money to spend, because we have slowed the rate of growth for several biennium. So the point of caution I take, and I've said this very frankly, Senator Linehan, there's 2 things I like to do if we have more revenue and resources coming in.
Excuse me, 1 minute.
Thank you. One is, I want to make sure that we are investing money back into things that are going to only help us build our state and our economy and revenue in the future. Right? So that's why we focus on people. That's why we focus on human services. That's why we focus on higher education and education. And the second thing that I do support doing is tax relief in a responsible way. The caveat I put out there is, if we are looking at new spending sites over the next several years, new spending, that's going to add on what we do as a lean 2.3%. We're going to need to really look at how we spend to make sure that we are ensuring the health of our state. We have to. That's going to have to happen in an Appropriations Committee and a Revenues Committee in 26, 27, and beyond. It is going to be their responsibility to do that. So I'm cautious, because I know when we have more money, we can provide relief. And I want to make sure we're continuing to do it responsibly into the future.
Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, colleagues. I wanted to rise in opposition to the bracket motion and talk about some of the concerns I have with certain aspects of LB 243. I think overall the goal is laudable and something that will draw widespread consensus in the Nebraska Legislature to address the perennial issue in terms of property tax relief for Nebraskans across the state. I know Senator Breezy has been very laser focused in terms of his leadership in regards to property taxes during the course of his service. So I definitely want to give a shout out and some appreciation to him for continually raising this issue. I think it's probably already been said, but just wanted to reaffirm that one of the biggest challenges we have in addressing property tax pressures in Nebraska from this vantage point from the Nebraska Legislature is the fact that we don't levy property taxes. So, of course, the property tax issue rises up from entities of local government, cities, counties, schools, perhaps a little bit for NRDs or ag societies to kind of round things out there. But of course, even though we don't levy it, the decisions that we make can either help to relieve the pressure on local property taxes or exacerbate the pressure on local property taxes. So why, of course, we continue to see this measure married with the school funding bill is because there is a direct correlation there. For every dollar that we send to the school districts, which make up, in many instances, the lion's share of the property tax bill, every dollar that we send out in school aid helps to not only educate our kids, but helps to relieve the pressure for local property taxpayers. So I really see that as the most effective and policy-based way for us to address property tax relief in Nebraska. And I'm glad we're making strides in that regard, which is one of the big reasons that I'm supporting the increase in education funding in particular. During my first term of service in the legislature, we worked together to try and establish and craft the property tax credit fund, relief fund. That was, I think maybe Senator Von Gilleran said, maybe a left-handed way of dealing with property taxes, which caught me as an interesting turn of as an interesting turn of phrase this evening, but I do think I appreciate and understand what he's saying there, with no dispersions to left-handed people, of course. But since we don't have that direct impact on property taxes, the Property Tax Relief Fund is indeed meant to provide relief to property taxpayers, but shows up in our budget as a spending program, actually, in terms of program design. So that's something that can be a little bit counterintuitive for folks who maybe aren't as familiar as how that program works, and can, every time we increase the property tax credit fund, yes, that will provide a benefit and some relief to taxpayers, but it'll show up and increase state spending in terms of our overall budgetary bottom line. So I know that there have been particular efforts in recent years to try and do more in regards to property tax relief. I agree, had a lot of the same conversations at the doors over the course of all of my campaigns about putting our heads together to find ways to address property tax pressures. Thank you, Mr. President. For Nebraskans who working Nebraska families, seniors on a fixed income, et cetera. Of course, this goes hand in hand with our efforts in updating our homestead exemption programs, the 1107 program, which many people were not familiar with. And I agree with Senator Von Gilleran, I was able to provide some information about those new components to people at the doors. They found that very helpful and informative. So I think that's also an important piece of the puzzle, that as these additional tools to provide property tax relief are just being realized by the citizenry, we shouldn't rush to put forward a very, very expensive measure, and we should let some of those existing tax cuts that were recently passed that haven't even come to fruition fully kind of play out. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So again, rise in support of the Bragg motion and opposed to the bill in its current form. I was talking about, my issue just with the specific changing the voter threshold. So moving the goalpost from what it is to win a referendum. And my opposition to that is both that it's in the Constitution, lays out what it takes to win a referendum. And I've talked about this on general file, which is that the Constitution lays out what the authority is for a referendum. And I don't think that the legislature can or should attempt to change the standard by which the public can initiate a referendum process, and what the threshold would be for a vote on that. And so that's really the basis of my opposition. I think that the other things that Senator Breezy's accomplished in as it pertains to the levy lids and overrides and things like that stands even in face of that. But so I was reading in the handy book here about the Nebraska Constitution and sort of an explainer of some of the sections, which I always enjoy reading on the Constitution. And I thought this was an interesting part about this, about the initiative process. And it was in Initiative 413. It was a tax lid that was on the ballot, placed on the ballot by initiative 1998 general election, and it failed. After that, proposals in the legislature to limit the initiative process were considered. 2 constitutional amendments were placed before voters. First proposed the ratification process that the commission recommended. The second proposed an 8-month filing deadline for initiative petitions for placement on the ballot. Neither was approved by the voters in the 2000 general election. This can be taken as an expression by the people of Nebraska that they treasure the initiative power, considered in conjunction with judicial oversight of provisions that facilitate the initiative and referendum procedure and the First Amendment limitations placed on legislative efforts at reform. Direct democracy is alive and well in Nebraska. So I thought it was interesting. So ballot initiative fails. Legislature attempts to change the standard under which ballot initiatives can be undertaken. And of course, the voters of the state of Nebraska rejected that because essentially attempting to limit the power of the voters. And that's the problem. When you change the threshold from 50% plus 1, you say it's no longer the majority of the voters, it is some other number, right? So you're watering down the power of the individual voters or of the referendum process. So that's what I think is dangerous about doing that. That's why I don't like this particular section, that particular thing. And again, I was just looking through this election. Obviously, there was that election in West Side that went 66%. So a lot of voters wanted that increase in the bond issue. But then I was just looking at the last election of ballot or referendums in the city of Omaha. Although I think most of the ballot initiatives in the city of Omaha in that last election were placed by the city council, but the voters voted 57,000 to 18,000 in favor, 67,000 to 20,000, 65,000 to 22,000, 63,000 to 24,000, 68,000 to 19,000. So the voters obviously overwhelmingly approved these. But the fact that when you have a referendum or a ballot initiative that it might pass handily is not the question of what the standard should be. The standard should be the rule of law and the Constitution, and the Constitution, I think, speaks clearly on this issue. So that's my issue with that. And
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the remainder of my time.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is this my first time?
This is your first 5 minutes.
My first 5 minutes. Okay, I have a second and a close. Great. Thank you, Mr. President. This has been an unusual evening. I wasn't expecting this. I do this a lot. When there's a lot of people in the queue, I get out and I get back in because I don't want to stand in the way of debate. I don't want to stand in the way of people having a conversation about the bill. And I did that numerous times tonight. I kept getting out of the queue and getting back into the back of the queue. And it was very full. It was very full. And then all of a sudden, everyone got out. And I was like, okay, I was confused by the fact that you all were in the first place because you were all filibustering for me, keeping the bracket motion up on the board for me. I was like, cool. I mean, I love a good break. I was playing a little game on my phone. It was very therapeutic. But then all of a sudden, an hour and a half in, hour and 20 minutes in, everybody got out of the queue. And I was like, okay, I mean, cool beans, whatever. I'll just start talking. I got my groove. I can do it. That's fine. I will acknowledge that for the first time in I don't know how long, somebody actually sent a note into me from the rotunda to talk to me about a bill, to talk to me directly, not to a surrogate, to have somebody talk to me. And while I didn't give them the answer that they wanted, I very much appreciate that they actually attempted to talk to me, because no one in the rotunda is forever trying to talk to me, and they're just scurrying around talking to people around me, trying to get the people around me to talk to me. And that's not how I work. I'm a one-on-one kind of gal. You want something from me, you want to talk about something, you talk to me. That's how I work. And just for full disclosure, what I really don't like is when people think that the best messenger is my brother. He is his own man. I am my own woman. We don't agree on a lot of things. We agree on a lot of things. If you want to talk to me, talk to me. If you want to talk to my brother, talk to my brother. But don't conflate the two. Don't conflate the two. Now, sometimes here, inside here, that might be different, but that's not because he's my brother. It's because when we are in here, we all have different relationships with each other. And depending on what the conversation is, there's a different messenger. Like today, Senator Bosselman came over to talk to me about his amendment. We're on the committee together. I know about the amendment. I know exactly what it does. Was very happy to talk about it. He didn't need a go-between. He talked to me. We had a great conversation. I spoke in support of the amendment, voted for it. Now, if you have some natural resources thing and you come to me and you're like, I want to do X, Y, and Z, I hope you'll vote for it or support it. That is a moment in time where I'll say, I'm going to talk to John because he's on the committee and I don't know as much about it. But the same would be true about other bills with other senators in other committees. I am going to say, if it's a bill that I'm not in my area of expertise, you know what? I'm going to check on that with so-and-so. So, use your better judgment. But for the most part, one-to-one is the way to go. And I think a lot of people will realize that they will get a lot more and they will get a lot further with the one-to-one. But the diverting your eyes when I walk out into the rotunda is not how you're going to get anything from me at all. So that's just a little PSA for the people out in the rotunda on how to maybe do your jobs of lobbying to this particular senator a little bit better is direct communication. So there we go. So I know we were going to take about 2 hours on this, and I think that's like 9:23-ish, up to the chair, of course, because the chair right now is also the speaker. But I don't think it's generally.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Vargas, you are recognized to speak. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a lot of fluidity to what's going on in here. So I wanted to talk, I've talked about my big issue with the bill, but I did want to take the opportunity that I did last time that Senator Bosselman talked again inspired me, Senator Bosselman, to talk about home equity theft, which is, as Senator Bosselman had talked about, folks being taxed out of their homes. So, we all want to make sure, of course, we've had a kind of robust conversation today about our responsibility to not charge people, assess more taxes than we absolutely have to run the state. And of course, we all know that property taxes are levied by local entities and not the state, but we do have the ability through certain things like levy lids, like is proposed in this bill, and direct aid to local government, which is also proposed in this bill, to lower or keep down property taxes. So we can do those sorts of things. And by doing that, of course, we're making sure direct aid, that's just a shift of money from one place to the other. But we're keeping property taxes low enough that fewer people are going to be, have their property taxes rise to the level where they can't afford it. And the problem we have is, of course, when somebody, gets to a certain age, as Senator Bosselman has talked about, this woman that had emailed him, I think this was yesterday, who's on a fixed income, she's on a fixed income and she has a small part-time job, and her property taxes go up and becomes harder and harder for her to pay. and you get to a point where somebody's built up equity in their house, their income stream is diminishing, and they don't qualify for homestead exemption, and it's a shame that person would be forced to sell their home and downsize or move into apartment, something along those lines, move in with family before they need to or want to change their living situation because of that, after they've put in all this effort over their lifetime to build up equity in a home. But even bigger travesty is in the fact if they can't afford their taxes, they miss a payment, somebody buys that tax deed, and then 3 years later converts that deed or that tax certificate to a tax deed, and they convert that and then sell the home out from under the person, and they get back recoup their cost of the tax certificate, and then they gain all of the equity that person had built up in their house, and then that person becomes homeless, of course, but loses all of the equity they built up because they missed some of their tax payments because their taxes were higher than they could afford. And so that is an obligation that's important that we are, I'm getting some looks from the front, sorry. But that's an obligation that we need to take seriously, is to make sure that of course we should keep people's taxes as low as we possibly can. We should do it for all of the reasons that people have talked about. But one really important reason is to make sure that older folks who have done their time, they've worked their jobs, they've worked their career, they've saved their money, they've put it into their property, built up equity, that they, one, can stay in their home, and two, don't lose that savings and that wealth that they've built up over those years in that home. So that is a really important part of what Senator Breezy's attempting to do here, is to create, some more stability and downward pressure on property taxes. So I do really appreciate Senator Breezy's diligence on this issue, and I appreciate his work. And of course, I've continued to fight him on a number of issues as it pertains to, mostly I'm fighting Senator Breezy on intrusion on local control. And that's where it's a philosophical fight between myself and Senator Breezy, but I really do appreciate the work he puts in to try to find new and creative ways to decrease property taxes. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. And Senator Kavanaugh, that was your last opportunity on this. Senator Dungan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, rise again just with some questions and comments regarding LB 243. Before I start, I'm looking over here at the pages that are sitting in the front, and I'm just generally curious how the pages decide who's going to be here during these late nights. I don't know if you draw straws or if you all volunteered, but they're all nodding yes, they volunteered. Wow, extra credit. Good job. Okay. Happy to see you all here. Thank you for being with us late. And for the folks at home watching, thank you for being with us late during these late nights in the legislature. One thing that stood out to me that I was talking about last time about LB 243 that I wanted to kind of reiterate and then talk a little bit more about some concerns I had is that I really do think there's a number of things contained in LB 243 that are the product of compromise. And we've seen Senator Breezy, I think, for years work towards property tax relief, and in doing so has had to, again, meet with stakeholders and have these ongoing conversations in an effort to get people on board with some of the proposals. And I've been very impressed watching him and others on the committee work with those stakeholders. And a really good example of that is the community college bill that is contained in LB 243. I'm sure many already know about it, but just to reiterate for those who might have missed other conversations, it's shifting community college funding away from property taxes and instead having it funded through the state. I think that that's a very laudable goal. I think that we need to make sure that state funding for education, both at the public school level, but also on the collegiate level, is something that we have because it shows our dedication towards education. One of the concerns that I voiced, however, with regard to that bill originally was what happens if the state is unable to fulfill its obligation to community colleges. And so we had talked at great length, I know, with the folks who represent community colleges, the advocates, the presidents of the community colleges, and ultimately a compromise was worked out where an amendment on the previous round of debate to LB 243 created, for all intents and purposes, an escape hatch or a release valve, whatever analogy you want to use. And to me, that is indicative of the fact that we can continue to work together and we can continue to find some compromise on these issues that we have concerns about. That addressed one of my major concerns, but it did not address all of my concerns on LB 243. One of the remaining concerns that I have, which I alluded to previously, and I'm sure I will talk about again as time goes on, is with the overall cost. One of the things that I think, again, we have to continue to be aware of is the green sheet as we evolve through this session, as we kind of wind down to our 90 days. We can see the overall costs of all of these bills as they approach select and final. What we have on the green sheet here is that, 243 ultimately, as I have on here, is 133-ish million for 23-24 and 178 million for 24-25. The cost then continues to rise to 194 million in lost revenue by 25-26, and then up to 200 million-ish by 26-27. And so, I know that's only a few fiscal years, but you do see continued growth in terms of the cost that this is ultimately going to lead to for Nebraska. Now, again, I support property tax relief. I absolutely do. We have to find a way to do that, but we have to find a way to do it that is responsible. And my concern is the continued exponential growth in the revenue loss that we're going to see for the state of Nebraska. So I know one of the proposals,
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President, that has been made is to place a stabilizer, a cap for all intents and purposes, on the 1107 fund's growth each year. I think that originally there was a 5% cap. I think there might be an amendment currently pending for a 7%. But one thing that I would encourage my colleagues to think about, I would encourage folks who care about this to continue to talk about, is the potential for implementing some sort of cap or stabilizer on the growth of the 1107 fund. Not because I don't think it's important that it grows. We have to make sure it does grow because we have to keep up with need. But I just want to make sure there is something there to ensure that it doesn't grow exponentially out of control and ultimately snowball into a place where we find ourselves unable to fulfill other financial obligations. So again, it's a concern that I have. I'm still thinking about LB 243, but I just want to continue to voice those concerns as we have this conversation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, colleagues. I wanted to share some additional thinking in regards to LB 243 and some of the issues that I think are deserving of some additional debate and deliberation are the following. So this measure would have almost a $2 billion price tag, give or take, and that's pretty significant. It would also, of course, have a cap on school districts. I know Senator Breezy, my friend Senator Breezy, talks about this as a quote-unquote soft cap. I don't have any quibble with the component of the measure that requires a supermajority vote of the school board to effectuate activities over the quote-unquote soft cap. However, as you may remember from general file, and I think Senator Dungan and Senator John Kavanaugh have reiterated again tonight, I do find the provisions of the quote-unquote soft cap that require a 60% plus vote of the people to effectuate the same to be anti-democratic. And to be clear, we have a robust tradition of direct democracy in this state, as we should. It's a critical and defining feature of Nebraska politics. However, we do not have, in other models that I am aware of, any super majority requirement when it comes to the vote of the people. The majority wins 50% plus one in our elections, in our initiative, in our referenda, in our recall. that should be the model and the standard in regards to this measure as well. I find that to be anti-democratic. And when I say that, I mean little d, not big D in terms of a partisan perspective, but in terms of our form of government. I also am a bit concerned when you look at the ultimate beneficiaries of the property tax credit fund. You're seeing again a pretty significant amount of inequity in terms of who the benefit flows to. So when you look back at how the program works, you can see that about half of the credits or so go to the top 20% of earners and flow additionally to many out-of-state landowners as well. So what does that mean really when we talk about the upper 20% in terms of tax and income in Nebraska? So when you look at the upper 20%, that's folks that are making north of $140,000 a year. So the primary beneficiaries of these tax credits will, again, much like the income tax credits and the corporate tax, the income tax reductions and the corporate tax reductions, again, are going to be providing the most significant benefit to the wealthiest Nebraskans and out-of-state corporations. I just feel that not only, again, are there sustainability concerns, but there are equitable concerns in regards to these measures as well. The final point that I wanted to lift in regards to some concerns with this measure that seem to have been alleviated in to a great extent was the idea that the state would pick up the overall funding for our community college system in an effort to reduce property taxes. I'm not sure if this is exactly right in terms of origin, but I first learned about this idea and this measure in reading some materials and publications from the Platt Institute. It jumped out at me, thank you, Mr. President, as an idea that was worthy of consideration and movement. But in early discussions with representatives from the community colleges, they were very, very concerned as to whether or not, in an effort to provide much needed, well-deserved property tax relief to our citizenry, if the state would truly keep our promises to keep community colleges well-funded so that they could meet their unique mission in terms of maximizing human potential and contributing to our shared prosperity and workforce needs. I understand many of those concerns were alleviated in changes to the program to provide some safeguards to ensure the state does keep its promise, but I am still a bit trepidatious about that, considering, again, here we are in a time of unprecedented economic prosperity and we're providing modest increases to higher education. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized. This is your last opportunity before your close.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I think we're about done for the day. Or I'm not done for the day. We're about done with this motion. We're going to go to a vote on this motion. So, yeah, I'm not going to belabor it. I'm going to waive my closing. Call the House.
There has been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed, nay. Mr. Clerk.
10 ayes, 3 nays, place House under call, Mr. President.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senators Halloran and Hughes, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. Senator Kavanaugh, we're lacking Senator Halloran, Hughes, and Hunt. Would you like to wait or proceed? Senators, the motion before us is to bracket until 6-2. All those in favor vote aye. All opposed vote nay. Mr. Clerk?
1A, 26 nays, Mr. President, on the motion to bracket.
The motion fails. Mr. Clerk, for items?
Mr. President, amendments to
raise the call.
Mr. President, amendments to be printed. Senator Kavanaugh to LB 243, Senator Breezy to LB 243, Senator Brewer, new LR 143. That'll be referred to the executive board. Name add, Senator Vargas, name added to LB 80, 130, 249, 274, 503, 512, and 596. Senator Boston, name added to LR 130. Finally, Mr. President, priority motion. Senator Boston moved to adjourn the legislature until Thursday, May 11th at 9:00 a.m.
Senators, you've heard the motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. We are adjourned.